Good afternoon to all the online students. Yesterday we were discussing about enlightenment. I hope the idea is clear to all of you. Let us revise very quickly. Yesterday we discussed about number 1, definition. So I hope the definition part is clear to all of you. We talked about two definitions. One is the standard one, which is more about the reference, that this was the phase of 18th century marked by intellectual, philosophical, cultural and social movement that dominated the ideas in Europe. So that is a basic level. Second, you can even borrow the words of Immanuel Kant, where Immanuel Kant talks about this is nothing but maturity of humankind, where we are rising above the ignorance that we have within ourselves. Your PYQ is also very much linked to that. That is nothing but, that is the idea of enlightenment. So from exam point of view, this is point number 1. Second, we discussed about the factors which were responsible for the rise of enlightenment. So we had a very big discussion yesterday. What is the meaning of enlightenment and how the factors, including like the first factor which we talked about, it was about the scientific revolution which was going on in Europe. We talked about Kepler, Newton, Francis Bacon, all of those who were very influential with respect to this scientific temper of Europe in 17th and 18th century. Second, thereafter we talked about imperialism and colonialism, which brought new ideas, among the Europeans. Plus this was also time of the Renaissance. Okay, so as a result of Renaissance, they went to different areas, they collected those ideologies, and that affected their overall thinking process. Third, we discussed about the decline of the trust within the constitution of church. There was a division. The division had happened in the 16th century itself, but by 18th century, what do we see? We see a complete decline. The fight was going on between the Catholics versus Protestants. As a result of this differences also took a political domain, or it divided the politics of Europe. It led to the 30-year war from 1618 to 1648, and thereafter the Treaty of Westphalia was signed, and that's how a lot of space arose in Europe. So these are the various factors. अगर 10 marker में कोई question आ जाए, okay, evaluate the factors responsible for the rise of enlightenment. So first part was definition, second part was the factor responsible, third is the overall character or the ideas which we summarize as enlightenment. Like Immanuel Kant published this pamphlet in 1784, where he asked, what is enlightenment? So we discussed that enlightenment was something which was affecting each and every phase, each and every institution. We discussed about various categories of ideas. Like in polity, this was the time where we talked about the beginning of separation of power, democracy, constitutionalism, republic. All such ideas emerged in the realm of polity. In economy, we see the beginning of freedom of profession. We see the discussion about capitalism. So all those starts in economy. Society, principle of equality, liberty, fraternity, that becomes prominent in social. Here, secularism becomes very important. You see, our constitution is mostly built upon the ideas of enlightenment. All right, and then science, as we've discussed, critical thinking, rationalism, okay, empiricism, all these things overall came to be known as enlightenment. So I think this is all that we had discussed in the previous class. We discussed about its limitations also. What were the limitations? Yes, so number 1, which was very, very clear, that it does not cater to the requirements of women, or the larger focus remain upon men only. That's why rationality in general, you see this stereotype also in the society, and men are rational and women are emotional, right? So that these kinds of stereotypes, they are also belonging to that 18th century. So that is number one point, the discussion. Second, we have discussed about that this alienated us, okay, from our very true nature. And third, with the rise of rationality, science, we have seen the character of human. You know, world wars have been fought, weapons of mass destruction has been created. So every time rationality has not taken the right kind of turn, we have also taken the wrong turns, and that have been linked with suffering, and that is something which we have to understand. Then we even discussed about the spread of enlightenment. What was the spread? The spread belongs to continent, like the first one to embrace this was Europe. Along with Europe, we also see it got transferred to America, North America more particularly. Thereafter, by 19th century, this became part of Latin America. It also reached Asia. Within Asia, we discussed about India, Japan as well as China, and thereafter it also became part of Africa. Okay, here you can also talked about Australia. Australia was a colony which was established by the British by the end of 18th century, and the settlements increased by the mid of 19th century. Okay, so this was more of a settlers colony. So from the beginning itself, the criminals, they were sent to the territory of Australia. So this is how enlightenment is going to spread across the world. Whenever we are going to discuss about any topic, one of the major part of that would be what were the impact of the ideas of enlightenment. Like Immanuel Kant himself, we discussed about him a lot. He himself was a very important person who talked about the German unity, because Germany was divided into more than 300 states, okay, till the 18th century, and by the 19th century we see its unification. All right, so this is how these people, they will become very, very important for the intellectual and for the intellectual creed of Europe, and that's something we're going to discuss about. So I hope the revision part is over. Any doubt you have, page number 1, 2, 3, 4 of your handout, please ask, because then we'll move forward and we'll also have a brief session on answer writing. Impact का बात करेंगे. So if we talk about the impact, number one, this brought new ideas, and these ideas eventually established modern world. So whatever world we have today, this is nothing but it has come from the ideas of enlightenment. Second, when these ideas were not accepted by some of the regime, it led to various revolutions throughout the world. Like you talk about American Revolution. Why did we see the beginning of American Revolution? What was the reason behind it? Reason was the imperialist rule of Britain. Okay, and when it became savior, they raised the banner of revolt. In the case of France or the French Revolution, it was about the rights of the people to govern themselves. So we see the contribution in terms of various revolutions. Number 3, this also began the process of decolonization in various parts of the world. Right? How decolonization? Because like India, see the example of India. We learned about the ideas of these enlightenment. We learned about the value of democracy, and that's why we started asking for the same kind of rule. That's why Dadabhai Naoroji, he said it is un-British rule, the way we have been ruled by them, and we should go towards a more democratic kind of setup. This also led to development of literature. Okay, mass education in the future was only possible because we generated so much of literature during the phase of enlightenment. Okay, so all these basic points you can remember. Let us now start. Your questions देख लेते हैं कल वाले, which I discussed. Like question number 1, enlightenment was not confined to scientific revolution alone, but humanism and idea of progress were its inseparable constituents examined. So what specific parts are required to be written in the answer? So number one, we have to write about the definition of Enlightenment. Okay, we can just define it that this was the phase which dominated Europe during the 18th century, and it was a mixture of philosophical ideas. Okay, then second, we will discuss how this was linked to scientific revolution. So we have to write about personalities like Kepler, Newton, Francis Bacon, and the impact of this, which led to the rise of scientific thinking, focus on empiricism, critical analysis, all those aspects. And thereafter, it also got linked to humanism. We have discussed about the progress, the focus on the progress of humanity. These two are the most important one. Humanism believes that their potential should not be tarnished. It should not be restricted from the outside. That's why all the institutions, economy, society, polity, all of this, they should embrace a kind of situation that humans, they should get promoted. Like yesterday we discussed about why do we require mass education? So that humanity can progress. Why do we require that poverty should be eliminated? So that again humanity can progress. Everybody can utilize their mental faculty to the best of the being. They should stay fit. So that what can be promoted? Humanism. Second, it's about the idea of progress. Progress is about the maturity. Okay, maturity in each and every institution. That is even discussed about Immanuel Kant. There should be progress in political institutions, right? Like today, if we see today's polity and the polity of 18th century, do we see a lot of progress? Yes or no? Yes, we do see a lot of progress, right? Today we are not a believer in the king's rights. We are a believer in democracy. We are a believer that there should be periodic elections. People should be allowed to choose a government for themselves. There should be civil liberty. So all those things that we discuss about, they are about progress. Economy, okay, industrial revolution. Why did industrial revolution become famous? Because this was leading us towards progress, material superiority. Okay, so all those three parts आपके बन जाएंगे यहाँ पे, and that is what you have to write here. Okay, so it's a very easy question. Question number 1. Question number 3, if you see, the principles of enlightenment were in some ways a continuation of the discovery and theories of scientific revolution. So we had discussed about the principles yesterday. So what were the principles? We discussed about rationalism, we discussed about empiricism, we discussed about humanism, progress itself also. Yes, so वो आपको पहले specific लिखना है कि what was this scientific. So in this, better would be if we start with scientific revolution. So first you will write, the scientific temper became increasingly important in Europe in 16th and 17th century, which got reflected in the rise of various theories in different fields. Then you can write about Kepler, Newton, Francis Bacon, the principles of science which emerged as a result of that. What were those principles? Same, rationality, है ना, rationality के ऊपर, empiricism, critical analysis, utility, all those things they developed, and as a result of that, the same got transferred to enlightenment, right? The same principles got transferred to enlightenment, and that's how different kinds of principle emerged in the enlightenment process in polity, economy, society as well as religion. वही rationality के basis पे polity में focus आया कि भाई democracy होनी चाहिए. There should be democracy, there should be separation of power, there should be rule of law. And this is nothing but, this is just about seeing the reality. So जो जितने भी principle हमारे science ने दिए, these principles eventually were responsible for the reforms in our polity, economy, society as well as religion. Why did we went that there should be no superstition? Because we were now a believer in science. And a believer in science means you're thinking that there should be certain scientific principle which can explain the reality. We do not have to go all the way back to religion just to support any specific idea. Like how the world has been created. Previously everybody was thinking in terms of religion, the biblical thoughts were there. But once we see that there could be this big bang, now all of us, if anybody asks us कि दुनिया कैसे बनी, हम ये तो नहीं बोलते भगवान ने बनाई. Majority of us, we always say it's about the Big Bang theory. Why is that happening? Because of acceptance of scientific principles. Okay, on the basis of these things we have progressed. Had we rejected them at that point of time, we would not have progressed so far. And the material culture that we have, it was not possible without that. That is what you have to write in this answer. Question number 3. Then we discussed question number 14 also. He was living in the age of enlightenment. The age itself was not enlightened. Okay, so in the introduction you can write about Immanuel Kant. That Immanuel Kant was a famous German philosopher. Okay, and eventually he asked people that what was enlightenment in a pamphlet which was published in 1784. And in this he commented that Voltaire, even though he lived in the 18th century, however the century itself was not enlightened, or there was a considerable difference between the ideas and the practice of those ideas. That is the easiest way to explain the meaning of this term. That ki bhai idea to the, but they were not getting implemented to that level. Then you have to just mention ki what was enlightened about it. तो सारे points आपने दे रहे हैं. The emergence of various ideas which we have discussed. देखो बार बार वही कहानी निकल के आ रही है. These are the things which were the embodiment of enlightenment. We even discussed about the philosophers. किसने कौन-कौन से realm में दिया है. You should be writing that also. Like in polity we discussed about Montesquieu. We discussed about even Rousseau. John Locke also we discussed. In economy we discussed about Adam Smith. In society we discussed about Voltaire, freedom of speech and expression, right? In religion we talked about Voltaire, who has worked that the church should not become a den of superstitions. It should remain an agile institution. And science, there are lots of characters which are linked with science. So multiple personalities are eventually linked. That is why it is called as enlightened. That so many people are eventually trying their level best to come up with new ideas, to reshape the world, to refashion the world, to make it more vibrant, to ensure that humanity can progress. If these institutions would not have been changed, it would have been very difficult for the humanity to go or reach where we are today. And that is something which you have to understand at the idea level. Then in this question, in the second part, you will write about that even though all these ideas emerged in the 18th century, all these philosophers were very prominent, however, these ideas were not implemented 100%. There were lots of differences, like if we see the area of France, France was still under the control of Bourbon dynasty, right? There was political absolutism. Even though these three scholars, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, all three, they belong to France, and all of them died by 1778. We'll discuss about this later on, because वहाँ पे भी एक debate आती है, historical debate says that who was responsible for French Revolution? Was it the philosophers or was it the other causes? The condition of the national life. What was responsible for French Revolution? So here what we will be discussing about is this, that all the philosophers, they died by 1778. So till Voltaire died, there was no French Revolution. There was no French Revolution. So he was living in the age of enlightenment. New ideas were emerging, but to what extent they are going to get implemented, that remains up in the air. So that's the second part. We discussed yesterday a lot about the failures, how these things, or we talked about the Middle Ages. What was the character of these Middle Ages? That has continued largely. Very few countries could get modernized in 18th century. And largely these ideas will be implemented during the 19th and 20th century. So that is what you have to write. Please see this question number 2. What was enlightened about the age of enlightenment? That is also clear. Here we have to also add that extra angle which we discussed yesterday. Enlightened despotism. Okay, enlightened despotism. Then that's it. We have to now start with Immanuel Kant. Please ensure that you revise these topics with, है ना, हर साल एक क्वेश्चन पक्का है. यूपीएससी ने बोल रखा है, मैंने आपको इंट्रोडक्शन सेशन में बताया भी था कि फ्रॉम विच टॉपिक्स यू कैन एक्सपेक्ट वन क्वेश्चन. सो वन क्वेश्चन फ्रॉम एनलाइटनमेंट इज 100% श्योर, एंड वन क्वेश्चन फ्रॉम मार्क्सिज्म एंड सोशलिज्म, वहाँ से भी हर साल आता ही है. तो आप इसको ठीक से तरीके से रट्टाफिकेशन करेंगे. लेट अस नाउ सी द कंट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ Immanuel Kant to enlightenment. What was his contribution? So introduction, you can, if you wish, याद कर सकते हो, year याद कर सकते हो तो और अच्छा है. So he is from 1724 to 1804. So he was a German philosopher. He taught jurisprudence and metaphysics for more than 30 years at the University of Königsberg. It is in Prussia. See his important writing. This is what you have to remember for your exam. His important writings includes critique of pure reason, critique of the power of judgment. Okay, he talked groundwork of the metaphysics of moral. Or he is somebody who is very much interested in morality. What is this moral law? Okay, so he talked about what is the moral law, how the world is going to sustain. Next is the critique of practical reason, and finally eternal peace. So there were large number of writings which were written by him, and we have to talk about them. If we see all these writings, there are certain ideas which are linked to him. See number one idea. So number one idea is he opposed extreme materialism. So he was somebody who was a believer that moral progress is the real progress. Okay, so when UPSC is asking you this question, that idea of progress, so when somebody says progress, progress could be material, है ना, जैसे हम सोचते हैं कि इतना मनी होना चाहिए, x एक हमने अपने लिए कंपोनेंट बना रखा है, उसके बाद काम नहीं करें कुछ भी हो जाए, right? That is our progress in life. For some progress could be health wise, कि भाई I should be this fit. For somebody progress could be moral, कि I should always be honest in my relationship with everyone. So it depends on what kind of progress you are looking for. So for him, the best progress was moral progress. Okay, it was not material progress. So that's why he emphasized that man's soul force is more important than his physical force. Personal experience is not always right, and reason is essential for distinguishing between right and wrong. This is something which he believed in it. That morally you will only progress when you are able to discern the difference between right and wrong. If you are not able to do so, how you are going to have moral progress? Number two, so he said he believed in the concept of universal moral law. Just like in ancient India, we talk about the concept of Dharma Shastra. Dharma Shastra says that there are certain universal laws, and when that laws are eventually going to be utilized by us human beings in our day-to-day functioning, the world will continue like it is. Okay, dharma आपको follow करना है. So in his case also he says that there is a concept of universal moral law. That law है ना, हम बोलते हैं ना instant karma, गलत काम किया और साथ के साथ में सजा मिल गई. That's why he was a believer in universal moral law and freedom, and he believes that law should protect and inspire freedom. Please remember this second point. This concept was utilized by Gandhiji when he was imprisoned after the non-cooperation movement. So he was just putting up his idea in front of the judge that should I follow this law which has been created by the British, which is immoral in itself, or should I follow the moral law, the law which should be followed by the most of the humanity? That's a very powerful kind of statement which was put forward by Immanuel Kant and later on utilized by Gandhiji. He gave birth to liberalism. Liberalism means that institutions, every institution should ensure that humans should progress. They should not create the clutches. कि जैसे religion है, if you're a follower of religion, it affects your everything. It's not like that it should breed superstition and it affects your whole understanding of the world. So any institution in itself should not be self-serving. It should help human. कैसे help कर सकता है religion humans को? जैसे कि number one, in developing their moral ideas, what to do, what not to do. Second, in ensuring good mental health, right? Religion plays a very important role. When you pray, eventually at least for some time you forget everything. So spirituality also. So institution should help human rather than we are just collecting funds for the religion or we're constructing n number of structure for the religion. What happens because of that? We are just ensuring that religion should survive, or we are just serving the religion. We are not serving, religion is not serving ourselves. So every institution should have this one job, that it should serve the prospects of humanity, and this is how liberalism is going to be practiced by us. Then he also talks about desires. He says that desire can be moral and immoral. Okay, and he says that the desire which are outcome of the reason are the true desires. You should know utility wise कि उसकी ज़रूरत है भी या नहीं है. Like if somebody is saying I want to clear civil services, so that is something which is a desire now. Now you have to see, can you eventually put that number of hours? Can you reframe your strategy from time to time? Even if there are 1 or 2 failures, can you handle that? Okay, if you ask yourself all these questions, so you have reached a point of rationality कि भाई ठीक है, I can handle this. Then this desire eventually becomes moral. और if it's just like कि YouTube पे 4 वीडियो देख लिए, गाड़ी एंट्री ये सब बकवास इधर उधर की कहानियाँ है ना, वो तो देखते नहीं कि रियल होता क्या है, बस वही कि एंट्री क्या, रॉयल एंट्री क्या होती है, ये सब देख के खुश होकर फॉर्म भर दिया, फिर बाद में हर वीडियो पे नीचे डाल रहे हैं कि फॉर्म वापस कैसे लेते हैं. राइट, दिस इज नॉट ट्रू desire, this is not rationality. So I'm just giving you an example how people eventually, those who think rationality about the exam कि हाँ मुझे ऑप्शनल करना है, जीएस करना है, किस तरीके से करना है, and those who are just looking कि भाई सारे नोट्स कलेक्ट कर लेते जितना भी दुनिया में है ना, उसके बाद सबको फोटोकॉपी करा के घर पे रखेंगे और फिर रोज परेशान होंगे कौन सा वाला पढ़े, ABCD 4 चॉइसेस है मेरे पास हर चीज के लिए. तो दैट इज हाउ यू यूटिलाइज कि रैशनैलिटी यूज कर भी रहे हो या सिर्फ एक डिजायर है, सेल्फ सर्विंग डिजायर, जैसे कोई आउटकम नहीं निकलने वाला. ड्यूटी, दिस नेक्स्ट पॉइंट इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर इमैनुअल कांत. ही वाज अ बिलीवर इन डियंटोलॉजिकल अप्रोच ऑफ एथिक्स. He says that duty should be followed irrespective of its consequences. It does have certain limitations. Okay, it does have certain limitations. Have you seen the actions of General Dyer? He said, I was following the orders. All the German people, when the Holocaust was going on, what were they saying? I was just following the orders. So duty, but in general, deontological approach is very very important in the administration. If Modi ji will give you certain कि ये 4 चीजें करनी है, then it becomes your duty, because political class has been more or less accepted by the people of India, the whole. पूरा तो नहीं होता, परसेंटेज तो है ही उसमें, चलो 40% लोगों ने वोट उनको दे दिया. But anyway, once somebody becomes a political executive, it becomes your duty to follow their orders, naturally written orders. But this is what is important, and there should be a hierarchy, chain of command. That's why Immanuel Kant is very important for the day-to-day administration. Because if in day-to-day administration all of us will start using our own brain, तो administration चलेगा ही नहीं, है ना. ऊपर से ऑर्डर आएगा, बॉस कहेगा ये करना है, नहीं ये क्यों करना है, ये तो करने की जरूरत ही नहीं है. So that's why hierarchy is required, है ना. वो पॉसिबल नहीं होता, उसके बिना कोई ऑर्गेनाइजेशन चल नहीं सकती आगे. That's why he says that duty must be done irrespective of its consequences. Hence means justify the ends. Also conduct should be good, as bad conduct is self defeating. कि अगर हम bad conduct करेंगे, so that's why along with duty, conduct, the nature of conduct, the nature of action also becomes important. Then he also comments on the necessity of a state. This was 18th century, the era in which he lived. States were used to be absolutist. They were not democratic states like today. So in those times he said that state is a necessary evil, meaning even though state has certain limitation, but at the same time, without the state, everything will be the state of nature. It will be complete chaos, right? हमसे अगर हम बात करें, ट्रैफिक लाइट तो हमसे देखी नहीं जाती, है ना, कि अगर हम एक दिन के लिए ट्रैफिक लाइट खराब हो जाती है, देखा आपने क्या होता है फिर, है ना. दैट इज एग्जैक्टली द स्टेट ऑफ नेचर. दैट्स आई एम जस्ट टॉकिंग अबाउट विदाउट एनी मेजर फाइट फॉर द रिसोर्सेज. एवरीबडी इज जस्ट लुकिंग फॉर द वे कि भाई मेरे को बस जाने दो इधर जहां मुझे जाना है. सपोज इफ दिस इज द फाइट which is required to be done on daily basis, that's why he says state is a necessary evil. Right now all of you know you have to appear in the prelims exam, then mains, then interview, then you will get the final selection. Suppose if all this process is not conducted by the state, everybody is fighting, है ना. आज भी फाइट हो रहे होते कि नहीं IAS के लिए तो इतना लड़ाई करना पड़ता है ना. This much violence is justified for becoming IAS. So that's why he said state is a necessary evil, because state has laws. These laws will govern the society. What does the law do? It ensures minimum level of morality. यही difference है law और ethics में. Ethics is something which is not necessarily all the way into the laws. Laws are the minimum. Like if we have any specific kind of crime, law will say this should not be done. Then you will be given punishment. हर चीज के लिए law नहीं बनता, ठीक है. तो हमेशा एथिक्स हमेशा आगे रहता है एंड लॉ इज ऑलवेज बिहाइंड मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द केसेस. लाइक इन सम सोसाइटी दिस, लाइक एक दो चीज़ों के लिए रिवर्सल भी होता है. लाइक इन केस ऑफ इंडिया वी ऑलवेज से इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, है ना, दैट्स लाइक द लॉ ऑफ द स्टेट इटसेल्फ, there should be no distinction on the basis of caste. But in our society, all of us know how caste is perpetrated, the manner in which it controls majority of the things. He was not in favor of revolution, opposition of revolution. Why? He had seen the French Revolution. He had seen French Revolution from 1789 till he died, and he realized that there was lots of upheaval. France wanted to have a democratic state, but the manner, the overall process, it was full of violence. That's why he said this is not the right method. While on the other hand, if we see the process of the reform process of Britain, it was on the conservative basis, and they were able to do more better than the France itself. So one country took the pathway of revolution, the other took conservative steps forward, and Britain was more successful in instilling democracy. All right, that's why Immanuel Kant, he was not in favor of revolutions in general. Next, he also divided reason into two parts. Like today, when we talk about reason, हम ऐसे divide नहीं करते हैं. But Immanuel Kant had divided into two parts. That reason is of two types. One is public reason. The other reason is private. Okay. So when somebody is drafting a public policy, तो उसमें क्या कौन सा reason आता है? Public reason. It should not have limitations. Public reason should not have limitation. Newspapers curtailing the civil liberties, or the fourth pillar, media, that should not be restricted. That is the public use of reason. However, once something becomes a law, when something becomes a law and you are going to interpret it, that is a kind of private reason. You're doing it for yourself, and there should be some curtailment. Okay, like suppose if we see a administrative hierarchy, तो वहाँ पे उन्होंने specifically public law बना हुआ है. Now you cannot change it by using your own reason, and that's why, and this was the biggest change which was seen in the domain of rationality. Previously, everybody just talked about reason, but he divided reason into two parts. That public reason is something which we should do in the benefit of whole of the society. However, on day-to-day basis, the focus should be on private reason. There should be some restriction put on the reason also. It can't be that reason can be allowed all the time. All right, because that in itself becomes subjective after a point of time. Like the perfect example I have given you, for your specific policies asked as a district magistrate कि go and take care of this thing. You will say नहीं, वहाँ जाने का जरूरत नहीं है. ठीक है ना? The policy says you cannot take leave. because नहीं मैं तो leave लेके जाऊँगा चाहे नौकरी से निकाल दो. Right? So these are the differences which we see. So for the first time he divided this. Just have a brief reading of this statement. Some restriction on freedom, they hinder enlightenment, right? And some restriction does not hinder enlightenment but actually advances it. And how does he justify this? He says that public use of one's reason must be always be free and alone. This alone can lead enlightenment among the mankind. The private use of reason may often, however, be very narrowly restricted without otherwise hindering the process of enlightenment. And then he gives an example. The public use of one's own reason means that anyone as a scholar makes of reason before the entire literate world. The manner in which the thoughts come in the newspaper, that is nothing but it's kind of public use of reason. Then he says the private use of reason is that which a person may take in a civic post or an office that has been entrusted to him. Right? See the Chandigarh case, returning officer. Was that public use of reason or private use of reason? Private. Right? अपने मन से line लगी cancel. Right? So that's why it should be restricted to some level. It can't be given कि नहीं मेरे को तो यही reason लग रहा है. That's why processes are created. कि आप seal कर दोगे किसी से उसको खोलना नहीं है. Right? This is why he says there should be some difference from public and private. In private you cannot give 100% freedom नहीं मिल सकती आपको. Here it should be restricted to some level. That's why processes are created in every organization, every state. Like there are some classified files of nuclear. आपको नहीं newspaper में डाल दो. Right? It doesn't make sense. Why? And that's why if you go to some sensitive post, आपके ऊपर बहुत restriction लगती हैं. किस पे लगती हैं आपके? प्राइवेट रीजनिंग पे। क्या आप बोलोगे नहीं यार एक काम करो, न्यूक्लियर पावर स्टेशन ना मेरे गांव में लगवा दो ऐसे नहीं चलेगा भाई। There are lots of things which are required eventually. तो उसके लिए पब्लिक पॉलिसी करो जहाँ पे आपको इधर उधर की बकवास करनी है, समेशन करके फिर एक अच्छा आउटकम आ सकता है। बट इन पब्लिक कैपेसिटी, इन प्राइवेट कैपेसिटी, दैट कैन नॉट बी एक्सेप्टेड। यू हैव टू गो बाय द रूल्स। दिस इज जनरल क्वेश्चन विच इज आस्क्ड बाय ऑल द, कहीं भी मॉक करने जाओगे ना इंटरव्यू के टाइम पे, हाउ विल यू रिड्यूस करप्शन? तो सबको पता है करप्शन क्या है दुनिया में। करप्शन की एक तो पहले डेफिनेशन कोई क्लियर नहीं है। एन नंबर्स ऑफ करप्शन। एक मॉनेटरी ग्रेटिफिकेशन होता है कि चलो ठीक है आपने पैसे लेके काम कर दिया, घूस ले ली। कोई होता है किसी को फेवर कर दिया, पैसा नहीं लिया। कोई होता है काम पे आता ही नहीं है, मोरल करप्शन, रोज लेट, सुबह लेट आना जल्दी चले जाना, महीने नहीं आना बोलना मेडिकल। तो करप्शन का एक तो डेफिनेशन नहीं है, राइट। तो वो अपने आप में एक प्रॉब्लम होती है। लेकिन जो सबसे मेन चीज है वो आपसे क्या पूछना चाह रहे हैं कि अगर आप ऐसा कुछ कर सको नया, तो पिछले 70 साल से जो ऑफिसर थे वो पागल है क्या? हाउ आर दे नॉट एबल टू रिड्यूस करप्शन? कुछ तो प्रॉब्लम होगी ना ऑन ए लार्जर स्केल। जब भी आप कोई भी आंसर दोगे सबसे पहला रिप्लाई यही आता है, सो व्हाट डू यू थिंक ऑल द आईएएस ऑफिसर, आईपीएस, आईआरएस ऑफ लास्ट 7 decades are fools? they have not thought about what genuine things you are thinking about? वो यही आता है, पब्लिक एंड प्राइवेट वाला पार्ट में आता है। सबको पता है पब्लिक में कि नहीं होना चाहिए, बट प्राइवेट आता ही कहानी खत्म। बिकॉज व्हेन इट कम्स टू करप्शन, कोई कहता है कि अगर हाँ थोड़ा सा लेंगे तो करप्शन नहीं मानते हम, है ना। आपने टर्म शायद सुनी होंगे नहीं होंगे, आई वाज फ्रॉम ब्यूरोक्रेटिक सर्कल, तो मैंने बहुत सुना है, छोटा रिचार्ज करा लो, बड़ा रिचार्ज करा लो, साल का करा लो है ना। व्हाट एवरीबॉडी वाज हैविंग देयर ओन प्राइवेट रीजन अबाउट करप्शन। दैट्स व्हाई इट शुड बी रिस्ट्रिक्टेड। इसलिए आपका सिविल कोड ऑफ कंडक्ट लगाया गया है कि हर साल आपको डिक्लेयर करना है कितना आपके पास एसेट है। शादी के बाद भी ना, कहीं शादी में भी दहेज लेके बैठे हो डाउरी में, शादी के बाद भी डिक्लेयर करना है क्या क्या चीजें आपको मिली है, मूवेबल मूवेबल। सो दिस इज नथिंग बट दिस इज प्राइवेट। कि प्राइवेट में रिस्ट्रिक्शन लेके आना ही पड़ता है। इफ वी लीव पीपल ओपन एंडेड, इट्स नेक्स्ट टू इम्पॉसिबल, बिकॉज हर कोई अपने हिसाब से चलता है। लाइक ही इज ऑल्सो गिविंग दिस रीजन, it would be disaster if any officer on duty who was given a command by a superior were to question the appropriateness or utility of the order he must obey. See a military fight, you're having a war kind situation, your superior saying go fire, you say no, humans will get killed. Even though they will get killed, the person is not wrong, but this is private capacity, because in public region already the war has been declared. Now either you're going to fight or you'll be a deserter. यही दो चीजें हैं। अब ह्यूमैनिटी नहीं आ सकती बीच में, राइट। दैट इज समथिंग विच इज देयर। बट सपोज इफ यू आर इन अ फाइट, यू हैव किल्ड द एनिमी, बट देन समबडी इज म्यूटिलेटिंग ऑल द ऑर्गन्स ऑफ दैट पर्सन, दैट वुड बी wrong, because there is also war ethics. But however you have to fight if you are a soldier. With respect to us non combatants, हम तो दूर से बोलते नहीं नहीं नहीं, हम तो आज तक मच्छर कुछ भी नहीं मारा है, आज तक मच्छर भी नहीं मरता हमसे, टेस्ट कर लो, राइट। हम उसमें भी फेल हो चुके हैं। बट इफ यू आर ए सोल्जर, यू हैव टू परफॉर्म योर ड्यूटी, सो योर प्राइवेट रीजन इज ऑलवेज गोइंग टू बी रिस्ट्रिक्टेड। ठीक है, ये चीज समझ में आई? आई हैव गिवन यू लॉट्स ऑफ एग्जांपल्स और यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड। इसके ऊपर यूपीएससी ने एक बहुत डिफिकल्ट क्वेश्चन पूछा था। दैट स्टेटमेंट इन इटसेल्फ इज डिफिकल्ट टू अंडरस्टैंड। अभी आप देखना वो पीवाईक्यू, इसलिए मैंने आपको इतनी क्लैरिटी दी है। फंडामेंटल राइट्स फॉर आर्म्ड फोर्सेस, देयर आर सर्टेन रिस्ट्रिक्शन, फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन नहीं है। यू कैन नॉट जस्ट, आज तो हम लोग कर सकते हैं, आई हैव लेफ्ट एंड यू आर नॉट देयर, राइट। अब हम जनता है, नॉर्मल जनता, बट द मोमेंट सम ऑफ यू विल गेट सेलेक्टेड, यू विल एंटर, आई विल नेवर आस्क यू कि भाई आप जाके गवर्नमेंट को क्रिटिसाइज करो, ठीक है, कभी नहीं करना है। क्यों? दिस इज नॉट द वर्क ऑफ ए सिविल सर्वेंट। अदरवाइज you become an activist, become a news anchor, something like that, a profession where you can bring change. If you want to change the government setup, you have to become part of it. You cannot just say ubiquitous outsider, सबको criticize करो, सर मैं honest हूँ, और मैं honest क्यों? क्योंकि मैं पैसा नहीं लेता, बस बाकी सब चोर हैं. This mentality doesn't work. That's why there is a certain code of conduct which is required to be followed by everyone. तो ये चीजें इसीलिए डिफरेंशिएट करी हैं, पब्लिक रीजन वर्सेस प्राइवेट रीजन. इट्स वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट कंसेप्ट. एंड दिस इज, आप पढ़ो एक बार दिस PYQ, योर क्वेश्चन नंबर 12. Question number 12 says Kant's redefinition of reason. Now is it becoming clear? What is the, previously everybody was just talking about rationality. There should be reasoning. अगर मेरे पास reason है तो मैं कुछ भी कर दूंगा क्या? Can I do anything? नहीं. उसके लिए इन्होंने divide किया था that there should be difference between public reason and private reason. So this is what it is talking about. Redefinition of reason. This is the redefinition. He recharacterized it. And rehabilitation of conscience. What was the rehabilitation of conscience? Previously people were thinking about that material progress is the real progress. Conscience means antaratma, your inner voice. Okay, that was also why? Because he talked about that the real progress lies in the moral progress. These are the two things, that redefinition of reason and rehabilitation of conscience marked a high point in the intellectual reaction against the dominant rationalism of the Enlightenment. The previous dominant rationalism, it was purely based upon scientific principles. कि अगर किसी institution की utility है तो उसको रखो, नहीं तो हटा दो. Will only go by empiricism. But when it comes to conscience, when it comes to reason, he was trying to just make sure कि pure reason नहीं चलता है. If you commit any act, then you justify it. Will it be accepted all the time? नहीं करेगा ना. You must have seen some of the movies है ना, जिसमें किसी ने मर्डर किया होता है. They are also trying to justify. और उसमें भी डिफरेंस होता है कि टेम्पर में किया गया, कोल्ड ब्लडेड मर्डर किया गया है. उसकी भी अलग अलग कैटेगरीज हैं. अभी हम लोग उसका वैसा जाते नहीं है ना, क्रिमिनल लॉयर्स नहीं है. बट दिस इज हाउ कि कोल्ड ब्लडेड है, गुस्से में आके हो गया, इन सब की भी अलग लेवल्स ऑफ पनिशमेंट है. कोल्ड ब्लडेड मतलब ये तो दरिंदा है, टॉप. कोल्ड ब्लडेड कुछ किसी ने नहीं उकसाया. लाइक टेररिज्म. Why is terrorism considered the worst form? Because किसी ने कुछ किया नहीं and eventually you are scaring and taking lives of people. Well, अगर किसी ने किसी को, somebody has murdered somebody else है ना, because of a family feud, it is seen in a different manner. And that is what we have to understand कि हर चीज की grading होती है. That's why Immanuel Kant also said we cannot just say that rationality के basis पे कुछ भी आप justify कर दोगे. Rationality in itself is going to be divided into public reason and private reason. In public reason, yes, there should be minimum level of restriction. I hope you know about this, that press should not be censored. Gandhiji was asked about this, that should press be censored by the state, because India की तो सारी press को British censor करते ही थे. So he said no, there should be internal regulation in the media. If there is internal regulation within the media, we are going to see a society which is ensuring that everybody can be criticized if there is something wrong. But if state is going to clamp down upon civic liberties, this affects our public reason. Like see the example of electoral bonds. Electoral bonds में क्या था? What was the basic logic why it was brought in? Because they said it will lead to transparency. SBI को भी नहीं पता चल रहा है अभी कि कहाँ गए, रिकॉर्ड कहाँ है, कहाँ गई वो ट्रांसपेरेंसी, राइट? तो जो रीजन दिया गया था, अब उसके ऊपर ज़्यादा डिस्कशन भी नहीं हुआ, बिकॉज जिस टाइप का क्रिटिसिज्म पहले मीडिया कर पा रहा था, कहीं ना कहीं आज उतना नहीं कर रहा है. वट एवर इट इज, नॉट गोइंग टू द डिबेट, बट दिस इज हाउ प्रीवियसली मीडिया यूज्ड टू बी वेरी स्कैथिंग, एकदम से बस लिखना चालू शुरू कर दिया. बट समहाउ दैट काइंड ऑफ स्कैथिंग वाज नॉट देयर, सो इट वाज इजी आल्सो फॉर द गवर्नमेंट टू जस्टिफाई. एंड बिकॉज इन डेमोक्रेसी इफ यू हैव द नंबर्स, तो फिर बाकी डेमोक्रेसी की जरूरत नहीं है, राइट? बिकॉज वंस यू रीच द पार्लियामेंट, इफ यू आर विक्टोरियस, इफ यू हैव द नंबर्स, यू कैन पास एनीथिंग. तो वो पब्लिक रीजन हो नहीं पाया ठीक से. इट वॉज मोर ऑफ ए केस ऑफ प्राइवेट रीजन. देयर शुड हैव बीन सम रिस्ट्रिक्शन ऑन दैट, पर वो नहीं हो पाया, है ना. अब फाइनली जाके सुप्रीम कोर्ट इज ऑल्सो सेइंग द सेम थिंग. देयर शुड बी राइट टू नो फॉर द सिटीजन्स, किसने फंडिंग दी, कैसे दिया, कैसे किया, किस तरीके से. इट डिड नॉट ब्रिंग ट्रांसपेरेंसी, है ना, इन द फंडिंग प्रोसेस. दिस इज हाउ इट इज. That's why Immanuel Kant is very important philosopher for us. He said that just merely saying, ना बहुत लोग बोलते हैं ना मैं तो बहुत रैशनल हूँ, ये नहीं है, ठीक है. वो क्या होता है, कुछ भी चीज को रीजन बना देते हैं. There should be firm ground, and that too it should be seen that if it is in the public sphere or it is in the private sphere. जैसे इसीलिए आप सब लोग जानते हो रिलेशनशिप में प्राइवेट रीजन तो चलता ही नहीं है. इट इज जस्ट अबाउट मूड, किसका कैसा मूड है ना। पहले शुरुआत में 2-4 बार लड़ाई करके समझ जाता है आज बात नहीं करनी है, साइड में जाके बैठ जाओ, है ना, फिर देखेंगे क्या करना है क्या नहीं करना है। सो दैट्स व्हाई रीजनिंग इज something which is important for humans, but at the same time emotions also do kick in, and this is how it is when we talk about dedication rationality से आती है, emotion से आती है। emotions बहुत बड़ा रोल प्ले करते हैं। had it been rational, Indian freedom struggle होती ही नहीं, कौन डंडा खाने जाता। हाँ, had it been only rationality, if you just see कि हाँ कि डंडा लगेगा और दर्द होगा, ठीक है, if you just see rationality, rational part of it, it would have never have happened. But if you see emotionally, no, India, our civil liberties were trampled upon. We were under the colonial rule. वो जो एक emotional side थी उसकी, वो बहुत dominating थी. That's why the people, they were in jail, but still the Quit India movement was going on, because that emotion got linked to it, and that's how dedication kicks in. The rationality, जो broad rationality थी of the earlier times, which was just talking about scientific thing, that is something which was changed by the entry of Immanuel Kant. उन्होंने उसको चेंज किया, and second he said that our conscience, look, this is how conscience ना built होती है from your early days till now. Like how many of you are non-vegetarians? तो ठीक है, कुछ 5-6 लोग हो, बाकी सब वेज हो या एग वाला भी हो, एगिटेरियन, ये वो बहुत सारी कैटेगरीज हैं। एनीवे, सो जिन फैमिलीज में नॉन वेज शुरुआत से खाता है उनके लिए मोरल क्वेश्चन ही नहीं होता ये, राइट? इट्स नॉट अ मोरल क्वेश्चन, बट दोस इन हुज फैमिली, लाइक सम ऑफ यू विल बी फॉलोअर ऑफ जैनिज्म, जो बिल्कुल अपना पोटैटो वगैरह अनियन से भी दूर है ना, बिल्कुल गार्लिक वगैरह, तो वो तो बहुत दूर है, वो तो पाप हो जाता है। गार्लिक इज वे हेड, राइट? दे हैव जस्टिफिकेशंस, इट मेडल्स विद योर स्टेट ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस, जो हम लोगों में वैसे भी नहीं है। तो हम मान लेते हैं कि हमारी तो ऐसी चल रही है, चलता जाएगा। बट ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड हाउ मोरालिटी किक्स इन। इफ यूल आस्क अ पर्सन हु इज अ फॉलोअर ऑफ जैनिज्म कि ऑनियन को देख के क्या इमोशन आते हैं, दे विल जस्ट अब गो बैक कि नहीं ये तो नहीं होना खाना है, वही मांसाहारी, इसके बिना टेस्ट नहीं आएगा, राइट? बिकॉज उसको पता है कि टेस्ट ऐसे डेवलप हुआ है, दैट इज योर कंसाइंस गेट्स डेवलप्ड लाइक दिस, राइट? दिस इज हाउ इट गेट्स डेवलप्ड। कंसाइंस ऐसे ही डेवलप होती है, कैसे आपने रियलिटी देखी, ठीक है? दोस्त अराउंड देम, अगर उनके नेबरहुड में सब ऑनेस्टी इज द बेस्ट पॉलिसी की बातें कर रहे हैं, द पर्सन विल आल्सो, द कंसाइंस विल गेट डेवलप लाइक दिस, कि मुझसे झूठ नहीं बोला जाता। एंड दोस्त उनके अराउंड में अगर ऐसे लोग हैं जो हर बात पे झूठ बोलते हैं, इधर एक दूसरे क्यों देख रहे हो? हाँ, तो अगर झूठ बोलते हैं, इफ देयर इज, तभी जो बच्चे की जो इनिशियल टाइम होता है, ठीक है, उसमें बहुत ध्यान से रखना पड़ता है कि एक दूसरे को गाली मत दो। बच्चा भी फिर तीसरे दिन आके दोनों को दे रहा है। तो दैट्स हाउ कंसाइंस गेट्स डेवलप्ड। देयर एनवायरनमेंट किस तरीके का था, दैट एनवायरनमेंट शुड बी वेरी क्लीन। सोशल लर्निंग किस तरीके से चलती है, तो दैट इज व्हाट ही टॉक्ड अबाउट, दैट वी शुड नॉट फोकस अपॉन ओनली मटेरियल प्रोग्रेस, वी शुड नॉट फोकस ओनली ऑन द वॉरफेयर, because this was a time when these countries used to fight time and again, there used to be losses to humanity, right? That's why he talked about moral progress. He also said that conscience should follow its duty. It should not that थोड़ी सी आफत आई और भाग गए। So conscience was changed. Why? First, it was taught that your inner voice should accept that morality should be followed, number one, and second, deontological approach, that if it is your duty, then you have to abide by it irrespective of the consequences. That if you are part of the India's freedom struggle, तो 2-4 डंडे पड़ेंगे लेकिन करना पड़ेगा, because it is your duty towards India, towards your motherland. So this is how the conscience was rehabilitated. Previous conscience, which was bound by only material progress, which was under the clutches of the domination of polity or your church or your dominant state, that was taken out, and that only one thing was important, and that was the moral progress in the long run. So try to understand, this is pure philosophy. This is pure philosophy that we're talking about, and in fact he was a philosopher with respect to metaphysics. तो जो चीज़ हम समझ नहीं सकते उनके बारे में ही बातें करते थे। अब जैसे ये रीजन है, when I also read it 10 years ago, अच्छा ये भी होता है, public reason and private reason. Many of you would not have heard it till now, right? So this is about philosophy, and philosophers का तभी नाम होता है जब वो ऐसे ऐसा कुछ नया चीज लेके आते हैं। So from question point of view, this is the most difficult question which we have seen for enlightenment so far, आज तक. तो क्वेश्चन नंबर 12 को एक बार फिर से रीड करो. ऑनलाइन स्टूडेंट्स ऑल्सो रीड दिस क्वेश्चन, क्वेश्चन नंबर 12, because this was the most difficult question. I was writing mains in 2017. ठीक है, I already got selected, right? तो मैंने देखा ये क्वेश्चन, भाई क्या लिखा, 4 बार पढ़ा इसको. रीडेफिनेशन ऑफ रीजन, रिहेबिलिटेशन ऑफ कंसाइंस. मतलब शशि थरूर ने पेपर लिखा है ना, कि उन्होंने क्वेश्चन बनाया है. बिकॉज नॉर्मल इंग्लिश तो है ही नहीं इसमें. नहीं, इसको समझने के लिए बीच में कुछ ऐसा भी लिख दो, ए एन दा, कुछ तो लिखो जो हमें समझ में आए. हाई पॉइंट इन द इंटेलेक्चुअल रिएक्शन, ओके, अगेंस्ट डोमिनेंट रैशनलिज्म ऑफ एनलाइटनमेंट. खत्म. क्रिटिकली एग्जामिन, क्वेश्चन ही नहीं समझ आएगा. So what was the dominant rationalism? The dominant rationalism was led by scientific revolution, which was talking about that there should be utility of everything. So somebody started asking the utility of morality. वो लोग कहते हैं मैं तो अच्छा इंसान हूँ लेकिन कुछ होता ही नहीं अच्छा मेरे साथ. So they started asking that kind of question कि इसकी तो कोई यूटिलिटी नहीं है अच्छा इंसान बनने की. यूट्यूब पे भी ऐसे बहुत वीडियो है, why to be bad in life, है ना. अच्छा इंसान हमेशा हारता है, the good people always come second. So when everybody was seeing it from rationality point of view, you cannot see morality from rationality point of view, because this is for the development of character. This is for the development of your own character. This is for the development of a society which can appreciate each other, which could be just, which could be eventually loving and caring in nature. आपने एक बहुत famous book है, ठीक है, that in that the central idea was we humans have survived. Okay, we humans have survived. Sapiens, I think आप सब लोगों ने पढ़ा होगा, नाम तो सुना ही होगा. We humans have survived because we live in a society. That's the only reason. And second, we have brain that is working more than the other animals, because we do not have the physical strength to fight with an elephant. We do not have the physical strength to fight or the agility to fight against any lion. But today, all of them, they require schedule act. है ना, शेड्यूल एक्ट की जरूरत पड़ती है उनको. What's the reason for that? Reason क्या है? Because we are living in a society. We have built this society, and that's why these philosophers focus on society as a whole, not only one single individual. And that's why they say that moral progress is the real progress. That is rehabilitation of conscience. आपके अंतरात्मा इस चीज को एक्सेप्ट करे. ठीक है, अभी हर कोई नहीं करता इस चीज को. मतलब many of you wouldn't, I wouldn't. डिपेंडिंग अपॉन द सिचुएशन हर कोई चेंज हो जाता है. हो गया आज मोरालिटी खत्म. स्कूल में तो बहुत बार होता था कि आज खत्म कर देते हैं. एवरीबडी वाज योर एनिमी, उसने कुछ भी बोल दिया हो. सो सी दिस क्वेश्चन नंबर 12, redefinition of reason. So I hope you can easily write that initially the dominant rationalism, it was just on the basis of the scientific principles. It was not dividing the spheres of reason. The spheres of reason were divided by him, public reason and private reason, and he also was able to make us understand what is the difference between these two and why there should be some restriction on the private use of reason. Previously, the dominant rationalism was saying it should be unfettered, it should not be stopped. If anything is rational, it should be allowed. But how would the administration work? How would the society work? Okay, if we say कि भाई हम law को नहीं मानते, हम law को नहीं मानते because we also have our own रीजनिंग, फिर क्या सोसाइटी चल जाएगी क्या? इट्स नॉट गोइंग टू वर्क. एवरी डे यू विल से नहीं ये लॉ मैं नहीं मानता. दैट्स वाई कि इफ यू नो यू डू नॉट नो, है ना. नॉट नोइंग लॉ इज नॉट अ रीजन कि आपको सजा नहीं मिलेगी, कि मुझे तो पता ही नहीं था. राइट, देयर आर पीपल लाइक दैट कि मुझे तो पता ही नहीं था ये गलत है. ऑलराइट, सो दैट इज नॉट गोइंग टू बी वन ऑफ द रीजन वी विल नॉट बी पनिश्ड. सो दैट्स वाई रीजन should be divided into multiple spheres, and that is something which was done by him. Second was the rehabilitation of conscience, where he talked about that we should focus on moral progress rather than just thinking about our external progress, that is your materialism. We should not just think about materialism, because this was also the age where we have seen the beginning of industrial revolution. In this industrial revolution, a section of the society which was now having the control over factors of production, your capitalist, they were exploiting the laborers. That's why he said that they should be focused on moral progress, not just external progress in the form of material life. And you must have always heard about this principles of minimalism. Japan में बहुत follow होता है. कि छोटा सा अपार्टमेंट हो, खाने पीने के लिए वैसी चीज़, ज़्यादा बड़े महल की तरह नहीं होना है, ठीक है, वहीं इंडिया आ जाओ, है ना, शादी करेंगे तो वही ठीक है, पूरा जामनगर, जामनगर में जाम नहीं है लेकिन शादी वहीं हो गई ना, पूरा दुनिया, दीज आर द बिग फैट वेडिंग्स, ओके। और इंडिया का तो ये एक सेंट्रल प्रॉब्लम है, दिस ईयर इन मेंस यू मे फाइंड वन क्वेश्चन ऑन द वेडिंग्स और मैरिज इन इटसेल्फ। भाई मैरिज में एक सबसे बड़ा इशू ये भी है इंडिया में जो बाहर पे नहीं है, ठीक है, मार्क जुबर्ग भी देख के डर गया कि ये क्या हो रहा है ना, व्हाट इज हैपनिंग, व्हाट आर दीज कस्टम्स, राइट। एक बड़ा प्रॉब्लम है एक्सपेंडिचर। There is a report that 60% of the people that take loans in India for these kinds of functions. अंबानी तो फिर भी नहीं बन सकते। अंबानी is spending 0.1% of his wealth. It should always be in percentage of कितना आपने wealth अपना वहाँ पे destroy किया एक दिन में। For normal people, it is around 10 to 20% of their whole life's savings, right? So does that pass the private reason? तो प्राइवेट रीजन इसलिए थोड़ा रिस्ट्रिक्ट होना चाहिए। इनफैक्ट देयर वाज अ लॉ व्हिच वाज ब्रॉट इन बाय वन ऑफ द प्राइवेट मेंबर कि देयर शुड बी कर्टेलमेंट ऑन द एक्सपेंडिचर ऑन वेडिंग्स, क्योंकि इंडिया में बहुत बड़ा प्रॉब्लम है, राइट। तो वो चीज़ समझ नहीं आप लोगों को। आई होप दिस क्वेश्चन इज क्लियर, इट्स अ वेरी डिफिकल्ट क्वेश्चन, दैट्स व्हाई वी हैड सच एन एलैबोरेट डिस्कशन। अदरवाइज अंडरस्टैंडिंग रीजन दिस वो नहीं समझ में आता है, ऐसा एग्जाम्पल्स के थ्रू ही समझ में आता है। इंग्लिश तो इसकी ऐसे ही है। So I hope this is clear to all of you. Let's see other questions on Immanuel Kant. Question number 12 is done. 13. Critically examine necessarily does not mean you have to always write limitations. Okay, but in the case of Immanuel Kant, we do have certain limitations which we'll discuss about. See the next point in his ideas, page number 5. Kant opposed international wars and conceived of a world state and an agency to control international relations. Okay, why international relations are so important? Because if you do not maintain the relationship, there are always going to be fights, disputes. That's why it was important. He subscribed to the theory of separation of power, but also supported absolute monarchy. He stated that administration should reflect the will of the people. For him, people are the source of law, for they are sovereign and entitled to use the highest legislative powers. See on the next page, there's certain criticism that if we see the ideas of Immanuel Kant, on the one hand he talks about sovereignty of people, but he also justifies existence of a absolute monarch. तो ये बहुत inconsistency ideas में होता है भाई philosophers के साथ में, एक बुक में कुछ और लिख दिया, नेक्स्ट बुक में कुछ और लिख दिया, हम दोनों पढ़ के खुश हुए हैं, बाद में देखे तो एक ही इंसान है, right? So absolute monarch versus sovereignty of people. Second, he did not propose the suitable form of government for the society. What should be the specific kind of government? And number 3, he is also criticized for giving too much importance to moral freedom. This aspect may be subjected to multiple interpretation by individual as per their convenience, because when there are two types of ways of looking at human being. Some philosophers say they are intrinsically good people, some say they are intrinsically bad people, like Machiavelli कि people are selfish, सुनना ही नहीं है उनकी बात, सीधा impose करो अपनी बात और आगे चलो, ठीक है। While there are people like Immanuel Kant who think that no, man is internally good, if the same character can be harvested, but it requires right kind of socialization. So those who think like this, they should be unlimited freedom. However, those who think people are inherently bad, they said there should be limited level of freedom. So depend करता है on the way you see the human side, it's it good or bad. So वो वाली चीज़ है, he sees that as good, and that's why he believes that there should be very high level of moral freedom. However, see the significance. Whenever we talk about significance of Immanuel Kant, one thing is very clear, that is about the idea of rationality that he was able to dissect for us into public reason and private reason. Second, he inspired a later generation of thinkers, which includes Hegel. Hegel is going to become a famous philosopher from Germany. Okay, he will be very important, and his ideas, Hegel is a person who is known as idealist. He was an ideal person. Idealism में believe करते थे, and his ideas are going to be borrowed by Karl Marx later on. John Rawls is a very famous philosopher. He has given this famous theory of justice. Okay, what John Rawls says that those who are making public policy, like right now, if you see the government, the public, whoever are framing the public policy, they should have a veil of ignorance. Meaning, like suppose I belong to middle class, right? So if I'll frame any kind of policy, मेरा सबसे ज़्यादा फोकस किस पे रहेगा? मिडिल क्लास पे. So there can never be absolute justice if you identify yourself to a specific background. Suppose if I am from the richest families like the Ambanis, what would be my focus? Business oriented. If I am from the lowest bottom strata of the society, what would be my focus? It should be on the basic necessities of life. So he says that an idea of justice, ये इन्होंने specific लिखा हुआ है, an idea of justice. In this he talks about that whoever are going for the public policy, they should wear a veil of ignorance, and then only justice can happen. And this idea eventually was influenced by the Immanuel Kant. And Kant's political philosophy stands for distinctive form of liberalism, which focuses on peace, because he believes that there should be international authority to manage the international relation. Cosmopolitan political morality, that is centered on the notions of moral autonomy, that people should be able to think, and universal obligation of all humans towards one another, both within and across the boundaries of nation state. So he was not a believer in ultranationalism. He was a person who believes that we are human first and then we belong to any second nation. That's okay. And this is in contrast to right-based, individualistic and utilitarian types of liberalism. Alright, so this philosopher part is a bit difficult to digest. Words याद नहीं रहते. आंसर जब आंसर भी लिखने जाओगे तो नॉर्मल वाला आंसर लिखने में भी काफ़ी चैलेंजेस आते हैं. तो आप सब लोगों को ये ध्यान रखना है, इसकी बहुत ज़्यादा रिवीजन की ज़रूरत पड़ने वाली है लास्ट में. There are three questions which UPSC has asked on Immanuel Kant. We have already discussed question number 14. He was living in the age of enlightenment. The age itself was not enlightened. I hope that is clear. This is the perspective given by him with respect to 18th century, the dichotomy between the ideas and the practices of 18th century. Question number 13. This is his idea of enlightenment. Okay, this was his definition of enlightenment, which he came forward in 1784. And why did he say so? What is the meaning of this statement number 13? Enlightenment is mankind's final coming of age, the emancipation of human consciousness from an immature state of ignorance and error. What is the meaning of this? Why is he saying this? For him, enlightenment was like this. We are saying it is more of a philosophical movement, okay, of 18th century, which affected all the domains of human life, polity, economy, society and religion. But for him, he is only centering it on the character of human being. Only on the character of human being. Why? Because all these institutions, political, social, economy, they are created by whom? They are created by the humans for themselves. And previously, humans, they were accepting all the middle age values. Values of political life, like that of absolutism, despotism, all of those were accepted by the human being. They were a believer in the divinity of the rights of the king. Similarly, with respect to economy, all the economic setup was under the control of the government. Mercantilism was being followed. Society based upon privileges, this was also accepted by the human being. Religion based upon superstitions, too much of interference into the personal life of people. Okay, so as a result of this, when humans started repudiating all these things which were linked to the Middle Ages on the basis of rationality, that was considered enlightenment by Immanuel Kant. But you have now come of age, now you are above that immature stage जहाँ जो भी कुछ बोलता है उसको मान लेते हो. You are now a leader rather than a follower. This is exactly the idea that you have to write in this question. Question number 12 we have discussed a lot, so I hope this is clear to all of you. Now let us see the next philosopher, Rousseau. So his full name was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, born in 1712 and died by 1778, and he was from France. He was one of the most intelligent and influential philosopher during the age of Enlightenment. If we see his prominent work, So the most important work is the theory of social contract. Okay, this is number one. Second, the discourse on the origin of inequality. Yesterday I gave you a brief idea about this inequality. So this is important because this is one of the founding texts on socialism. Because socialism, what does socialism talks about? It talks about inequalities in the society. So that's why his text becomes a standard text with respect to the initial idea of socialism. Discourse on the science and art, that is okay, not that much important for exam. And finally is Emily. Emily is a work which he has talked about education. Okay, how specific the education should be. So that is, these are the four major works of Rousseau. Let us just try to understand one after the other. इनका मीनिंग क्या है, ओके, और किसमें क्या सेंट्रल आइडिया है. Number one, discourse on the origin of inequality. So here he says that initially human beings, they were not having the concept of private property. Since the concept of private property was not there, inequality was there, but this inequality was of which kind? Natural inequality. We're talking about the ages of Neolithic era, Mesolithic era, where the concept of private property was not there, right? So he says that the two types of inequality are there: natural inequality and inequality by society itself. Natural inequality can be tolerated, but social inequality must be removed. So thus justified revolutionary changes in the social institutions. And as per him, ideal type of the society was when there was no concept of property. Because look, आज की डेट में देखो, we see the concept of property, how it divides all of us into various classes. Okay, your quality of life also depends upon the how much property you possess. Okay, those who have money, they try to care about their time. Those who don't have money, eventually they don't care about time also, because पैसा कमाओगे उसमें time पूरी life चली जाती है. Like the service class, this is more important for the service class because the whole life they are doing the single job, right? That is what is important, because it is because of this concept of private property. All right, that's why he says property breeds greed, right? Why do we have corruption in the world? What's the single most important reason? It's the possession. And what is this possession all about? Creating private property. This is what it is about. He talks about this. Okay, he says that narrow ambition in the society. Why do we have conflict with each other? What's the single most reason? The resources. Okay, that is the problem we have. And as per him, it has created mutual hostility and warlike atmosphere. Hence, he was against economic disparity. That is very, very important. Why do we have civil wars in many countries? The major reason, it is economic disparity, which is there, fight over natural resources. And that is a very important idea which was given by Rousseau. This is a discourse on the origin of inequality, how inequality or the artificial inequality comes into the picture. And this artificial inequality is only linked to private property. To some extent, these ideas influenced the rise of communism. However, communism in itself was also not able to get rid of the concept of private property. In practice, in theory, it is not a believer in private property. But in existence, you see Russia, you see China, है ना? तो कोई difference तो है नहीं उनके बीच में. The economic policy, they do also have private property. Only in terms of polity, the concentration of power is there in one party. So that is also a part of communism. But the fundamental of communism, it's not a believer in private property. That is not followed by any of the communist state till today. Second is discourse on the origin of discourse on the sciences and arts. So he talks about that some of the arts and sciences have corrupted moral virtues and laid the groundwork for arguments he would later develop more deeply about society's degrading effect on humanity. So he says that the major focus should be moral development. Just like Immanuel Kant says, he also says the same. Focus should be on moral development rather than material happiness. And this is something which is being directed by science. Okay, this is directed by science. And he also says, even though this idea was not universally accepted, it made people aware of imminent revolution and established him as an important Enlightenment thinker. The most important from exam point of view, from the ideas point of view, is the theory of social contract. Now, let us try to understand this theory in detail. Why this becomes prominent? Theory of social contract. Because before this theory, there was a belief, okay, that every state that exists, it is required to be ruled by a specific king. And what used to be the justification? Divine rights. There are certain divine rights given by the God, and that's how the king is able to rule over the state. This was a normal practice which used to be there. But when this theory of social contract came into the picture, the first important thing that he talks about is that state and society, they have signed a social contract. Okay, they have signed a social contract. And what kind of social contract is this? What is the role of state today? क्या role है state का? Yes, very important. Safety of all people, security of frontiers, development, what is the role of society? Society will provide taxation, they will pay the taxes, because if taxes are not paid by society, how the state will have the resources? That's the most important thing. Second, human resource, again it is provided by society. Right? और कहाँ से आता है? Natural resources also. Their harnessing requires labor. So it says that there was a social contract which was signed between society and state. However, what has happened over a period of time? State has forgot its social contract. What kind of challenges have come because of not following the social contract? They are indulging in wars. They are ruining the overall material well-being. They have brought in the concept of privileges. Some people are enjoying wealth while the others are not able to survive because the taxation rates are so high. Okay, like in France, the taxation rate for a normal peasant were 80%. 80%. There's a historian who comments, आपके notes में भी आएगा, that 4/5 of the France was dying because of starvation and 1/5 because of indigestion. Why? No, 4/5 of France was dying because of starvation. खाने को कुछ नहीं है. और 1/5 are dying because of indigestion. इतना खा रहे हैं, क्या करोगे उसका? Right? And why is this happening? Because of system of privileges. Right? So that's why he says that state has lost its importance. State has lost its importance, and that's why such a state which is not following this social contract can be challenged and upthrown. And this is a very, very powerful kind of theory. Why? Because it ensures that from where does we see the rise of sovereignty. So he says that sovereignty is not residing in the king, sovereignty is residing in the people. That's why it is known as popular sovereignty. So that is a very new format of government which he is able to come up with. And you have to remember this. He also gives a narrative why the state was created. He says that initially the number of people who were living in an area were very small. There was no fight over resources. है ना, imagine you are living in Neolithic era. 2-4 गांव हैं दूर दूर तक, कर लो कब्जा जितना करना है. Right? You have nothing. Land पे क्या करोगे? You require labor. But right now there is a humongous fight. What would have been the overall population of the world in the Neolithic era? कितना होगा? Estimate लगा के भी कुछ मिलियन में होगा, ठीक है, 5-10 मिलियन होगा. और कितना होगा पॉपुलेशन उस टाइम पे? टुडे वी आर 8 बिलियन. है ना, उसके 1/6 ह्यूमैनिटी तो हमारी है, सबसे बड़ा कंट्रीब्यूशन तो अब हम ही कर रहे हैं, है ना. वी इन चाइना, है ना, मिल्क के 2.7 बिलियन तो हम ही हैं लगभग, right, 2.7, 2.8. So fight is going to happen, and it's when the population increases, you require authorities, because without this governance is not feasible. Okay, governance is not feasible without it. And as a result of, he says that when the state was given certain rights, you can collect taxes, you can have a specific state structure में पुलिस बना सकते हो, so that it can ensure laws, है ना, कि laws वगैरह उसको implement कर पाए. But what is being done by the state? State is not focusing on the requirement of society. That's why it says, and this is very, very powerful, because in this is, we are talking about 18th century, not today. But in 18th century, somebody says if a government is not following its social contract, that government can be upthrown. So he was one philosopher who justified revolution, कि भाई revolution कर सकते हो. Napoleon the Great, he says that had there been no Rousseau, there would have been no revolution. This is the famous statement. Even though it is not entirely correct, we'll discuss about it later on, but the importance of Rousseau and the mentality that he was able to create among the people was something very big. And that's why his idea was also a bit different from the other philosopher. He was a believer that emotions are important. That's why he is the founder also of the school which is known as Romanticism. What is the meaning of romance? Movies wala romance nahi. Romance is about that we should not always do that. The society should face the problem because of somebody's individualism. There should be a kind of harmony in which a community can survive. So romance का जो literal meaning होता है, that is about living in peace and comfort with each other. That is what it is all about. So he was somebody who said that how can we always believe that rationality is going to do that? It is also happening because of emotions. We have fundamental emotions of love, hope, fear, all those things which affect us from morning till night. So he was the one who was a believer in Romanticism. We'll have more discussion about it later. Initially focus on this, that his contribution is something which is very, very important. He came out with this theory of social contract, and as per this theory, he said that it is the liability of the government to ensure that the contract that is signed, वो आपको follow करना पड़ेगा. It's not like that you will keep on fighting wars, you're going to ensure privileges while the people are dying because of having no food. And this is over which UPSC also framed some questions. Can you see question number 9? Question number 9 says, Rousseau strove to reconcile the liberty of an individual and the institution of government through a new vision of contract theory of government. Okay, contract theory of government. Here I have used the word state and government interchangeably, but I hope all of you know the difference. And when we talk about state, there are 4 elements which are there. And what are those? It includes people, territory, government, and idea of sovereignty. And government is just one of them, which exercises the sovereignty over people in a specific area. That is what the government is all about. So Rousseau, I hope you are able to understand this question. This is a new idea of the contract theory of government. This theory, please come to your handout now. The democratic and revolutionary principles put forward by Rousseau's social contract have made it one of the essential texts of political philosophy since its publication in 1762. I would ask all of you to please remember the publishing year, because if UPSC asks you a question on this, at least you can write in the introduction that this theory of social contract, it was published in 1762. Okay. With this work, Rousseau sought to determine how civil society could both ensure the security of individuals and maintain their freedoms. Okay, here we will discuss some ideas. Then, critiquing the inequities perpetuated by absolute monarchy, he argued for a political system which is based upon social contract agreed upon by all members of society. Now, when he says, what is this social contract? Social contract sign कैसे करेंगे? How will the contract be signed. So for that he came up with the concept of general will. Okay, that there should be a general will, and this general will should be abided by the government. Now this concept of general will is it's a bit difficult to understand. I'll make you understand जहाँ तक समझ सकते हो, but इसका थोड़ा सा difficult है. Why? Because if somebody will just go by the literal meaning of the term, it will look like it means consensus. A general will should be consensus, but it is not consensus. The idea of general will, it is not directly linked to consensus, and he gives a reasoning for that. What does this? Rousseau says that when people are mobilized on the basis of political issues, they are not able to express their general will. If somebody says Article 370 should be abrogated, खत्म कर दे दो उसे. Is it a general will or it's a political mobilization? Political mobilization. And उनका बहुत time से BJP has been saying that we are going to scrap this article. They did so also. But anyway, he says that general will can only be compiled when people are not part of any political group. They shouldn't be part of any political group, because what happens, everybody is not able to convey the same kind of meaning when they become part of the larger group. अकेले होगे ज़्यादा बोल पाओगे, खुल के बोल पाओगे. वहीं पे एक पार्टी में आगे वहाँ एक लीडर सामने आ गया, कोई बोल ही नहीं रहा है, हाँ ठीक हो, आप ठीक हो, ठीक है. That's why even though he says that it should be a general will, but the concept was something which was half cooked. We were not able to understand exactly what he meant by this concept of general will. In fact, this concept is going to be misutilized during the French Revolution. During the French Revolution, there is going to be a famous personality, Robespierre. He will say that he was executing people. Okay, he was executing people left and right, which is the famous term, I hope in polity you must have heard about, guillotine. And a guillotine generally is used in the political terms that when you do not have any time left, कहा चलो एक साथ वोटिंग करो, खत्म करो, राइट. हमारे पास टाइम नहीं है बिल पढ़ने के लिए, जो हमारा मेन काम है एज अ पब्लिक लेजिस्लेटिव, है ना, वो हमारे पास टाइम नहीं है. तो दैट इज नोन एज गिलोटिन. बट देयर द लिटरल मीनिंग ऑफ गिलोटिन कम्स फ्रॉम फ्रांस, where the people's head they were cut. Okay, so during this phase of 1793-94, when we'll discuss the concept of French Revolution, you will understand even better. During this phase of 1793-94, more than 40,000 people in France, they were guillotined. And what Robespierre used to justify them, because he was following the general will. However, nobody understand what is this general will all about. In general, अगर आपको याद रखना तो इतना तो general will does not mean consensus. Rousseau says that it is the will of the people when they are not part of any political affiliation. कि भाई लोगों को तुम grouping नहीं करोगे. The moment you are going to go for the grouping, eventually people will not say what they actually require. वो फिर बड़े ग्रुप में जो जैसे आता है, एक दो लीडर बन जाते हैं spontaneous, है ना. They become कि भाई नहीं, we are the voice of this group. However, it is not the voice of the group. It is just nothing but you are bit dominant. जो कि थोड़ा सा shy kind का इनका होता है, वो बोल ही नहीं पाते, हाँ ठीक है, okay. That's how it is. That's why he says general will does not mean consensus. Consensus में क्या होता है ना कि some people become more powerful. So he says that it is the will which can be compiled only when people do not have any form of political affiliation and they are asked in private. And when we summarize all these private wills, it becomes general will. जैसे आप घर पे होता ना कि भाई हाँ मेरे प्रॉपर्टी किसके पास जाएगी, that is your private will. पूछ के नहीं लिखते, अपने हिसाब से लिख के चले गए. That is a kind of private will. And when we summarize all the private will, अब इस पूरे concept में एक बहुत बड़ी problem है. Like suppose, if I do not care much about governance, will my private will be considered for that purpose? Everybody is not political in nature. बहुत लोग ऐसे भी होते हैं एड्रेनलिन रश के लिए लाइफ में आए, है ना, मैं तो ये करने में मजा आ रहा है, हमें कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. We are not political minded. So how to reach this general will in itself is a big problem. But however, this is what he talked about. आप लिखने के लिए याद कर लेंगे. मुझे नहीं लगता जनरल विल के ऊपर कोई क्वेश्चन आने वाला है. This is not philosophy optional. This is history optional. उसके ऊपर क्वेश्चन नहीं आएगा. But I've given you the idea. It does not mean consensus. It is the will which is compiled when people are not part of any kind of political affiliation. Please remember these words. अपनी कहानी खिचड़ी मत पका देना, हम बहुत लोगों की इंग्लिश ऐसी है, धीरे धीरे करके सेम में जाते हैं. It is not consensus, but it is like consensus. है ना, वो नहीं होना चाहिए फिर लिखते टाइम. The general will of the people as expressed by the social contract. Because how would the social contract, like today what we have done, to some extent our social contract is our constitution. Do you see the concept of constitution? Right? It is like a general will. Because there were elections, three and a half years, they sit together, then they created each and every constitution. है कि आर्टिकल के पीछे बहुत constituent assembly की debates हैं. That is nothing but it's like creation of a जनरल विल. बट ये हमारा अपना इंटरप्रिटेशन है. इट वाज नॉट द इंटरप्रिटेशन ऑफ रूसो. वो बहुत 200 साल पहले जा चुके हैं, उन्हें इंडिया के बारे में पता भी नहीं था क्या चल रहा है यहाँ पे. ठीक है. द जनरल विल ऑफ द पीपल एज एक्सप्रेस्ड बाय द सोशल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट वुड प्रोवाइड द बेसिस फॉर लेजिटिमेट पॉलिटिकल अथॉरिटी. दिस इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. लेजिटिमेट पॉलिटिकल अथॉरिटी एंड इंश्योर दैट स्टेट्स लॉ प्रोटेक्टेड द कॉमन गुड. कॉमन गुड्स, इट्स एन अप्रोच which says that people should respect the common goods. क्या क्या common goods हैं हमारी लाइफ में? Food, सिर्फ food. Common goods is more about environment, कि pollution मत फैलाओ. Right? This is known as common goods approach. You should not create violence because it creates panic among the people. So that is what common goods is all about. That if we are able to follow the general will, it is also going to protect the common goods. The next line is very powerful. You can use it in your introduction. This can also come as a comment in your exam. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. This is a very powerful statement. Why did he say so? Okay, the exact interpretation nobody knows, but this is such a powerful line. But if you interpret it, it looks like he is talking about institutions. Okay, when you are born, just let us take an example. When a boy or a girl is born, do they have any kind of knowledge? They are free from anything. है ना, घर के अंदर एक बच्चा होगा, कुछ जो मन में चाहे करता है, जहाँ खाना है वहाँ खाया, जहाँ फेंका फेंका, जहाँ चिल्ला दिया उसके ऊपर चिल्ला दिया, है ना. Then slowly all of us get well mannered, है ना. जैसे जैसे बड़ा होते हैं एक responsibility आती है, you have to behave in a certain manner, right? So when somebody is born, they are free from everything. They are free from any name. They are free from any specific caste. They are free from everything. Right? Tension से भी free, exam से भी free. ना कुछ साल तो पढ़ाई भी नहीं करनी पड़ेगी. They are free, है ना. अभी तो ये भी एक बहुत बड़ी दिक्कत है. But anyway, he is talking about that at that point of time, polity, economy, society, etc., that is not affecting the child. But the moment the person starts एक्सेप्टिंग द आइडियाज, है ना, 1-1.5 साल के बाद एक उम्र आती है, धीरे धीरे आप जो बोलोगे वो वापस से उसको रिपीट करना चालू करेगा. तो दैट इवेंचुअली विल स्टार्ट फॉर्मिंग द एटीट्यूड ऑफ ए बॉय और ए गर्ल. एंड बाय द टाइम दे आर 7-8 और बाय द टाइम दे ग्रेजुएट, दे आर नाउ अ पार्ट ऑफ सोसाइटी लाइक ऑल ऑफ अस आर. राइट? दैट्स व्हाई ही सेड मैन इज बॉर्न फ्री बट एवरीवेयर ही इज इन chains, because slowly all these institutions of polity, economy, society, religion, they engulf each and everything from that person. और आज हम क्या है? We have all these domains of life, right? अब कल महाशिवरात्रि है, right? So religion is built like this. अब आप में से बहुत लोग एकदम से उसी दिन religious बन जाओगे, है ना, कि आज तो जाना ही है, कुछ दिनों बाद फिर पेपर भी है, तो आज जाना है एक बार. Right? So how did this happen? किसी ने तो ये आपको आइडिया दिया है ना, बॉलीवुड मूवीज में वो घंटी बजाते रहे, एकदम से फिर भगवान प्रकट हुए और फिर पेपर पास हो गए. राइट? किसी ने तो ये आइडिया दिया है ना. तो यू आर नॉट फ्री, यू हैव एक्सेप्टेड दैट आइडियाज. एंड व्हेन वी हैव फियर्स, ना, वी हैव मल्टीपल फियर्स. एक सबसे बड़ा फियर इस एज में होता है करियर का. करेंगे क्या? जैसे करियर हो जाएगा तो फिर जीवन साथी कौन होगा, है ना. कुछ लोगों के दोनों साथ में चलते रहते हैं, कौन से. दीज आर द फियर्स दैट वी हैव. एंड व्हेन यू हैव फियर्स, इट्स वेरी इजी फॉर अदर्स टू प्ले विद इट. जैसे पॉलिटिशियन किसके हाथ देते हैं? रोजगार देंगे सबको, हर कोई खुश, हाँ हमें देंगे, हमें तो रोजगार मिलेगा. क्या रोजगार मिलेगा पता नहीं, बट दिस इज हाउ दे प्ले विद इट. राइट? ऑल द पॉलिटिशियंस दे डू इट. उनको पता है ना कि यूथ को कैसे, यूथ को आके वो बात थोड़ा ना करेंगे कि मतलब वो वो समझदारी वाली नहीं, वो सीधा बात करेंगे एम्प्लॉयमेंट की, रेवोल्यूशन की, परिवर्तन आप लोग लेके आओगे, ऑल दोज थिंग्स, एंड यू विल बी लाइक हाँ ओके गुड, हम तो आ गया है ना, जैसे कि वेस्ट बंगाल में परिवर्तन आ गया ना, संदेश खली से दिख गया परिवर्तन. दिस इज हाउ थिंग्स आर. So people get corrupted because of these institutions. They are not able to remain their real self. This is what he was talking about, that we know what we have been taught. We have not been taught to think freely. We have not been taught to think freely. That is a big problem that we have. Okay, from the beginning parents teach you like this, हम सही हैं, हमारी बात मान लो. इस एज में तो और ज़्यादा हम थोड़ा सा रेबेलियस हो जाते हैं. No, but that's how it is. The conditioning is like that in the society. That's why he is mentioning that man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. So वो बस initial phase में ही free रहता है जब तक वो सुनता समझता ज़्यादा कुछ नहीं है. But the moment they are being integrated as a member of the society, they have to accept all these institutions, political, economic, social, culture. अगर जिंदा रहना है तो ठीक है, they have to accept all these institutions. And that's why he commented this. And in this, if this statement comes in the exam, you have to mention about the institutions of Middle Ages, जो हमने discuss किया था, कि how the polity was based upon absolutism, divine rights of king, economy, you do not even have freedom of profession, society, it's based upon system of privileges, you cannot join the higher bureaucracy in countries like France. Religion, you have to exactly accept the interpretation of the Pope. If you go against it, even your life may be taken away. So that's why man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. This is a very powerful statement. This is the opening sentence of Rousseau's social contract. Not only summarizes his entire philosophical system, but it also proves how important he still is today. It is very, very important. He says that as man becomes civilized, this is what I was talking about, he made contract to consolidate power and give birth to state. Growth of property necessitated the origin of state. This is very important. Why do we require state? सबसे बड़ा fear क्या होता है? Property चली जाएगी, right? Whatever resources you have, that will be gone. Then state originated with a contract for power to be enjoyed by the creator of the state. Thus rulers and even a king are representative of the public. Thus he asserts that public is empowered to change all those representatives who interfere in the maintenance of freedom, equality and fraternity. This is the most important point. That's why he is the only philosopher of the age who is justifying revolution, who is justifying that state or the government can be changed, the setup can be changed, okay, if you wish to, if they are not following the social contract. But the concept of general will in itself was relatively vague. This was not very clear through and through. So आज की डेट में the general will, अगर हम बात करें general will का, in India we do not have direct democracy. There are various methods of direct democracy जो हमारे पास नहीं है, right? I hope all of you know, like referendum, it's like a direct democracy, वो हमारे पास में नहीं है. We have been given choices कि इनमें से political party select कर लो, right? So we have this indirect form of democracy. नहीं तो हम हर छोटी छोटी चीज़ पे, हर बिल पे हम आते, फिर ये बिल पास होना चाहिए कि फिर नहीं होना चाहिए, फिर देखते हैं मनी बिल है कि नहीं, right? We have to also assess, because naturally that is direct democracy. So in countries like Switzerland, we do have this concept of direct democracy. They also have the concept of recall, कि अगर आपके जगह का MLA MP काम नहीं कर रहा, वापस बुला लो उसको, will send next representative. That is power. आपसे 5 साल में एक ही बार पूछा जाता है ना, 4.5 साल वो कुछ नहीं करेगा, 6 महीने पहले अरे आप तो बहुत अच्छे लोग हैं, है ना, वोट हमें ही करना, right? This is true for all the politicians, majority of them. Last one comes Emily on education. So this work outlined a process of education that should prevent a man from being corrupted by society. तो उसी का solution दे रहे थे कि man is born free but everywhere he is in chains. So how उस corruption को रोके कैसे, right? So he talks about this. Instead he nurtures his natural virtues and goodness, and that's why he says that moral values should be the top priority in education. Children should be encouraged to express their thoughts and feelings freely rather than being confined. And he opposed artificial education. Education should be utilitarian so that they can benefit out of it rather than forget what have been taught to them. Like in India, अपना education system देखेंगे, फर्स्ट से लेकर 10th क्लास तक सब कुछ पढ़ो, फिर एकदम 10th से सब कुछ हटा दिया, अब ये पढ़ लो, फिर ये पढ़ लो. हाउ डज दिस वर्क? फिर यूपीएससी में कहते हैं ऑप्शनल चूज कर लो. तो हाउ डज दिस सिस्टम वर्क? सो एजुकेशन के ऊपर थोड़ी प्रॉब्लम्स है. Next, he come to next page. He opposed study of ancient language like Latin, Greek, and did not favor religious education. That is very important. So he was secular. Previously, we do not understand it today. Education was completely under the umbrella of religion. Majority of this education, it used to be taught in the churches, and that's why he was not a follower of that. He said it should be secular in nature. We should not just read about these religious texts. Then he became the proponent of romanticism. What is the meaning of romanticism? This is the most famous statement. The promptings of the heart are more to be trusted than the logic of the mind. Why did he say so? Like the whole dominant rationalism, it's talking about that you should think, utility of every institution should be established and then only it can stay in the place. However, he is saying something different. Promptings of the heart, जो दिल कहता है वो सच होता है. शाहरुख खान वाली लाइन कैसे आई यहाँ पे? Right? How did this come into this? Because he was somebody who was a believer that it's not just individualism. Individualism नहीं, साथ में हमें क्या चाहिए? Community centric भी होना है. That's why he was a believer in this, and he says this because majority of the people in 18th century, they were not educated, and it's very difficult to have proper conduct or proper basics of rationality if they are not developed. How can you express rationalism? How can you take decision on the basis of rationalism when you do not have the proper channelization of your own rationalism? Like when we were younger, अगर आप सिविल सर्विस की तैयारी नहीं करते, इन सब चीज़ों के बारे में ज़्यादा फोकस भी नहीं होता कभी कि व्हाट इज़ फ्रीडम, व्हाट इज़ रैशनैलिटी, व्हाट इज़ फंडामेंटल राइट. कौन फोकस करता है इनके बारे में? ओनली दोज हु आर गेटिंग द राइट काइंड ऑफ एजुकेशन can eventually think about it. That's why he said that even though people are talking about rationality, rationality is not going to work because these people do not have the necessary infrastructure or they do not have the necessary education for channelization of their own rationality. That's why he is somebody who is a bit talking about the popular side of the population, majority of whom who are not educated. And this shows the importance of natural state of men instead of process of overemphasizing reason in guiding human behavior. Like see, elections are coming. What is going to guide people? Reason? Reason or what? जो मन में sentiments. Some people will go for immediate gratification कि यार वो 2-4 चीजें मंगाई थी, आ गई क्या, वोट कर देंगे. क्यों नकली शराब बिकती है before elections? What's the reason for that? Why that huge tragedy happened in India? आप और मैं तो पार्टिसिपेट नहीं करते इन सब में. बिकॉज दिस पीपल इमीडिएट ग्रेटिफिकेशन कि आज शराब मिल जाएगी, कल वोट कर देंगे, किसी को कुछ और, किसी को कुछ और. सो डू यू थिंक दैट इज रैशनैलिटी? नो, इट इज नॉट रैशनैलिटी, इट इज प्योर इमोशंस, है ना, वो उसके बेसिस पे चल रहा है काम. एंड दिस इज हाउ इंडिया इज. दिस इज हाउ इंडिया इज. इंडिया डजंट रन ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ रैशनैलिटी. सच अ ह्यूमंगस कंट्री. डू वी हैव कोई भी लॉ फॉलो करते हुए देखा है? वेरी फ्यू पीपल. आप गाड़ी चला रहे हो, पीछे से कोई हॉन्क करेगा, अरे रेड लाइट, आपको रेड लाइट है, कोई बात नहीं, निकाल ले, मैं भी पीछे पीछे आ रहा हूँ, है ना, वी आर टुगेदर इन दिस. सो इन इंडिया इट्स सो डिफिकल्ट टू गो टुवर्ड दैट फेज. जनरेशंस, है ना, जनरेशंस. अब ये तो आपने देखा ही होगा, रोड पे अगर कोई भी अगर पेडेस्ट्रियन आ रहा है ना, गाड़ी तेज होती है, धीरे नहीं होती है कि वो रोड क्रॉस कर जाए, वो और तेज होती है कि वो पीछे हो जाए. यू गो टू यूरोप, हर रेड लाइट के साथ में एक बटन है, मतलब आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट फ्रांस, स्विट्जरलैंड. आप प्रेस करोगे, ऑटोमेटिकली लाइट्स उनकी रेड हो जाती है, यू विल क्रॉस. पीपल विल रिस्पेक्ट यू दैट यू आर अलाइव. और हमारे यहाँ तो बस यही होता है कि हमने तुम्हें जिंदा छोड़ा है आज अगली बार ध्यान रखना, तेज और तेज आ सकते. कौन लॉ फॉलो कर रहा है यार? कहाँ रैशनैलिटी दिख रही है? कहाँ मतलब इमोशंस आर सो डोमिनेंट इन डे टू डे लाइफ. मतलब मैं तो सुबह से लेकर शाम तक देखता हूँ रैशनैलिटी प्रॉपर, मोस्ट रैशनल व्हेन यू आर इन द क्लास, बिकॉज यू आर टीचिंग एट दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम, राइट. अदरवाइज क्या डोमिनेट करता है? इमोशंस, हर चीज में. सो दैट्स व्हाई द फिलॉसफी ऑफ रूसो बिकम्स मोर रियलिस्टिक फ्रॉम पीपल लाइक यू एंड मी, द कॉमन पीपल पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. वी नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट फिलॉसफी प्रोफेसर्स जो बैठ के सुबह से लेकर शाम तक बस बातें यही कर रहे हैं, व्हाट इज ट्रुथ, व्हाट इज जस्टिस, व्हाट इज फ्रीडम. पीपल लाइक यू एंड मी जो इन सब चीज़ों के बारे में बात नहीं करते. So here emotions are more important. That's why he says the promptings of heart are more to be trusted than the logic of the mind. Next, he was an advocate of simple life, that we should live in harmony with nature. We should not go too far away from the nature, otherwise we will lose our essence, the humanity. Humanity has grown and built up in very closeness to the nature. Then he advocated for rejection of those institutions which are not ensuring the well-being of human being. That's why it's a very famous statement. Voltaire had harnessed the horses of reason because he was a believer in reason, while Rousseau unchained the tiger of emotion. Even though the final result was same, both of them, they were saying there should be popular sovereignty. However, one is focusing on the reasoning part, the other is focusing on the emotion part. Please remember this. These were the alternative approaches during the Enlightenment. Can you see this question? Question number 6. Enlightenment represented alternative approaches to modernity, alternative habits of mind and heart, of conscience and sensibility. So these are the different approaches that we have. One is focusing on the emotion, the second one is largely we are still focusing on rationality. So it's not like 100% of the philosophers were going towards rationality. Some like Rousseau were a believer that emotions are better guide rather than the rationality all the time. Then initially he was favoring individuality, but later on he shifted towards community centric living. Okay, that individual sacrifices can be done for the benefit of society. And finally his philosophy eventually became very prominent, and the creed of the French Revolution, equality, liberty and fraternity, was very much linked to his thoughts. So this is about Rousseau. Okay, UPSC has asked many questions. Can you see question number 7? Rousseau kindled a hope which became the spirit of enlightenment. Okay, so he was the one, he kindled a hope. So you have to talk about his works and finally his impact. Second, question number 8. Explain the major ideas of enlightenment. We have already discussed about the major political, economic, social, religious and scientific ideas of enlightenment. Then we have to only discuss the contribution of Rousseau. So his contribution is required to be written. क्या क्या इन्होंने works लिखे, उनका importance क्या है? It's an easy 20 marker question. Question number 10. The promptings of the heart are more to be trusted than the logic of the mind. Why? Why did he say so? What are the reasons? Why the promptings of the heart? Because everybody may not have the same level of rationality, but at least just because somebody is a human, there is a natural sense of right or wrong, which comes from your conscience, right? And that happens on the basis of heart. दिल का अच्छा है. What is that दिल का अच्छा है? गलत काम नहीं करेगा. Why? Because that conscience is linked to your heart. Heart देखो in general ऐसा तो है नहीं जैसे मूवीज में दिखाया जाता है, वैसा तो हार्ट है नहीं, है ना, कि वो दिल अलग है दिमाग अलग है, ऐसी दुनिया नहीं है, राइट? वो तो समझ में आता ही है ना कि दिल और दिमाग कुछ अलग होता नहीं है. जस्ट डिलेमा बोलते हैं उसको, है ना, एथिक्स में इसको डिलेमा बोलते हैं. दिल और दिमाग कोई अलग अलग, मेरा दिल ये कह रहा है, दिमाग ये कह रहा है. यू हैव टू चॉइसेस इन फ्रंट ऑफ यू, यू आर कंफ्यूज्ड. अब दोनों में से एक कोई चूज तो करनी पड़ेगी. So in case of Rousseau, he says that heart, emotions are a better guide. So if we today talk about emotional intelligence, so to some extent, they are also saying the same thing, right? Some of you may have already studied the topics of ethics. So there is one person known as Daniel Goleman. So Daniel Goleman says that if you want success in life, 80% of your success, it depends upon emotional quotient and 20% depends upon your IQ. IQ 0 पे तो काम नहीं चलेगा, बट उसका सिर्फ कितना परसेंटेज है आपकी सक्सेस में रेशो? 20%. 80% हमेशा कहाँ से आएगा? इमोशनल क्वोशिएंट. Those who are leaders, they are emotionally always mature, except North Korea. They are emotionally mature. मतलब मोस्टली जहाँ पे डेमोक्रेसी होगी वहाँ तो EQ 100% आएगा. मोदी जी, you see him, कभी लगते हैं भयभीत? नहीं. He knows how to play the whole of India, because politicians are required to be like that. always looking like strong personality, right? और वो कहाँ से आता है? Because of very high level of emotional stability. ये चीज़ समझो, सबसे ज़्यादा मुश्किल होता है पूरी जनता को बेवकूफ़ बनाना, and वो politicians करते हैं. So they do people management of the highest level. They have to develop a consensus without telling the people कि ये तुम्हारी नहीं मेरी ही जरूरत है. They have to develop that consensus. So what is required? Emotional quotient. Emotional quotient बहुत ज़्यादा चाहिए होता है. Administration. When you reach the administration, many times it's just about managing emotions. सिर्फ managing emotion, pure IAS में सिर्फ manage कर रहे हो आप emotion सुबह से लेकर शाम तक. Because when people will come, eventually they will have some problem. सबसे पहले उनके emotions आते हैं. उन बात नहीं बताएंगे पहले. परेशान है हम तो, बहुत परेशान है, बहुत ज़्यादा परेशान है. देन से अब बता भी दो परेशान किस लिए. कुछ नहीं कर रहा है एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. पहले आप ये सब सुनोगे 5 मिनट, देन विल कम टू अच्छा ये 3-4 चीज़ें, चलो ठीक है ये करा देते हैं सॉल्व. तो यू हैव टू इंश्योर कि भाई ठीक है आपके स्टाफ को गाली दे रहे हैं फिर भी चुप रहना पड़ रहा है, राइट? बिकॉज इमोशनल क्वेश्चन. बट इफ यू विल फाइट इन द वर्ड गो, बिकॉज देखो इंडिया में if you see administration does not have 100% capability even till today. We are not able to serve all the people in the right manner. नहीं कर पाते. We are in Delhi. You go to the hinterlands of India, है ना? Some of you will be residing there also. Villages तो होंगे, right? Banks तक तो है नहीं. बड़ी मुश्किल से पिछले 8-10 साल में बैंकिंग नेटवर्क बहुत अच्छे से एक्सपेंड हुआ है. So problems हैं with respect to administration. These people when they reach, तो पहले दिल की बातें आती हैं कि हमारा तो ये हो गया, राइट? एंड देन कम्स द रियल वर्क कि कराना क्या था. सो इट्स अबाउट मैनेजिंग द इमोशंस डायरेक्टली. सो दैट्स व्हाई रूसो टॉक्ड अबाउट दैट पीपल शुड अंडरस्टैंड दैट देयर हार्ट इज गिविंग द राइट काइंड ऑफ इंडिकेशन. इट्स नॉट लाइक दैट कि भाई ठीक है ये हमेशा गलत होगा. तो दैट्स व्हाई ही टॉक्स अबाउट दिस. सेकंड, ही नोज दैट दोज पीपल हु आर इलिटरेट cannot be expected to be rational like those who are educated. There's a demarcation between them. I'm not saying people will not have wisdom. There will be people like Akbar who are illiterate but they're still having wisdom. However, talking from the larger point of view, like I hope some of you know that some of the states of India, previously there was no educational qualification for the panchayat election, but they were introduced by Rajasthan, Haryana also. What was the major reason for that? कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में तो नहीं है, एमएलए एमपी के लिए भी नहीं है एजुकेशन क्वालिफिकेशन, लेकिन पंचायत के लिए चाहिए. व्हाट इज द रीजन फॉर दैट? टू अब प्रमोट क्या करेंगे एजुकेशन को? प्रीवियस जनरेशन तो जरिए आप उस एज में कहाँ पे प्रमोट करोगे? इट वाज जस्ट बिकॉज दे सेड कि इट इज डिफिकल्ट टू चेंज द प्रीवियस जनरेशन, सो वी शुड ब्रिंग इन द एजुकेटेड पीपल इनटू द सिस्टम ऑफ पंचायत. उनको मैनेज करना चाहिए, वो चेंज जल्दी लेके आएंगे. That's why it was done. However, फिर उसका काउंटर पॉइंट वहीं पे आता है कि क्या हमेशा एजुकेशन से ही रैशनैलिटी आती है? There are so many people है ना पढ़े लिखे जिनको बोलते हैं पढ़ लिख के भी ऐसे हैं, right? Even after education they are not able to act in a rational manner. However, when he talks about it, this was 18th century. In 18th century, education was next to zero. Education used to be there for the aristocrat. 80% of the French, okay, they were peasants. 80% of population. Do you think they will have access to these rational point of views? No, it was not there. That's why he was catering to a specific segment of the society. And number 3, he also realized that the real power, it resides in the people of the country. And when everybody come together and when their heart are linked with each other, they're going to take right decision. जब सारे लोग ही एक तरीके से है ना बहुमत है ना सब लोग ही एक तरफ हो गए हैं, then it's going to be a right decision. So that's why rather than caring about rationality, rather than caring about education, he says that focus on this, that the promptings of the heart are more to be trusted than the logic of the mind, because mind may have certain limitation, because mind require cultivation. If you and me, we study philosophy for 3 to 4 years, the way we speak with each other will change, right? फिर हम बात ही सीधा करेंगे रिस्ट्रिक्शन ऑफ फ्रीडम दिस दैट एक्सेट्रा लाइक आवर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. बट नहीं तो हम क्या बोलते हैं, अच्छा आप कैसे हो, राइट? बिकॉज थिंग्स आर वी आर नॉट कन्वर्सिंग इन दैट बिकॉज इट्स नॉट आवर सब्जेक्ट एंड एवरीबडी इट्स एप्लीकेबल टू all the people. You see people of India also, How many percentage were literate in 2011? Around 74% people. That much literacy we have. So there is a certain section of the India which is illiterate even till today. So do you think they can be expected to understand the rational point of view? Can you ask the question to them, should there be electoral bonds? What is transparency? Can that be expected? We are not demeaning them, but at the same time, we have to also recognize कि भाई कितना वो उसको सोच पाएंगे, right? So that is why he said promptings of the heart are more important. दिल कह रहा है कर दो बाद में देखेंगे, right? Rationality वगैरह देखी जाएगी. So these were the ideas which were put forward. That's why his ideas are even justified by Napoleon. Napoleon said, had there been no Rousseau, there would have been no revolution. कोई revolution नहीं होता फ्रांस में. Let us see the assessment. There is certain criticism of Rousseau. Like the first, ninth वाला या 10th वाला पूछ रहा हूँ. हाँ, 10th वाले में क्या होगा ना कि भाई these were the alternative approaches which were put forward by these philosophers. While one was talking about giving more reliance to the heart, the other was giving more reliance to the mind. However, both of them, their objective was same. And what was that objective? The objective was people should recognize. Okay, people should recognize. They should ensure that they are not eventually exploited by the political class or by the kings, right, or by the institutions in general. That was clean. That was they were on the same path there. However, their approaches were very different to each other. See the criticism of general will. So the first criticism of Rousseau, it comes from this concept of general will itself. His theory of general will unfortunately provided a pretext for any arbitrary ruler to coerce recalcitrant subjects, pleading that they, much as they are enslaved to their particular wills, do not know what general will is. So it was, the concept itself was not clear, as I have already told you. According to Rousseau, general will is different from the consensus of individual member of the society. I hope all of you understand this by now. कि ये individual consensus के बराबर नहीं है. This differentiation led to conflict between the liberty of individual and the institution of the government, and was responsible for the charge that Rousseau's philosophy contained the seeds of absolutism. Okay, and however, this was used by Robespierre, who was Rousseau's follower, and the spread of reign of terror. This phase is known as reign of terror, where whoever was thought that they are against the French Revolution, they were guillotined by the Robespierre and his followers, and which includes king as well as the queen. They were also guillotined. So when he was going through this phase of reign of terror, he justified it by using the concept of general will. So it was prone to lots of misuse. He executed anyone who he considered was not following general will. अब कहाँ से आई general will? How to define general will? That was a big challenge. Second, he also became the founder of counter enlightenment. The initial enlightenment, it was a focusing on the rationalism point. Okay, however, here since he is focusing on the romanticism, and that's why it seems like he has a distaste, है ना, पसंद नहीं करता the reason को, knowledge as well as individualism in general, and that's why he is considered as the founder of counter enlightenment or romanticism. And there is also a bit of discrepancy in the initial ideas of Rousseau and the later ideas of Rousseau. So if we compare discourse on origin of inequality and social contract, initially he was a follower of individualism, but by his later years he became a follower of collectivism or communitarianism. ये होता भी है यार. In the age of 20, 30, 35, you are individualistic. When you become old, तो कहते सारा परिवार साथ रहना चाहिए, right? So individualistic versus collectivism. So by later time he became collectivism. That's why there's a little bit of discrepancy within his own ideas. Significance. What is the significance of his work? Like number one, this is the significance, empathy. So he focuses on empathy, that whenever you govern people, you should see from their own eyes. It should not be that you're just seeing everybody from your own status, right? That is not the right method to do so. So empathy rather than reason as the ground for morality. Second, he was the first modern writer to synthesize good government with the self-government in the concept of general will, even though the concept of general will did not develop. Okay, however, he was the first one to talk about good government, how the government should be, because government should follow the general will. And then the concept of nation state is very much linked to it. Even though he himself was not a nationalist, his philosophy contributed to this. And then finally comes the socialistic orientation. Why? Because he was the first person who eventually talked about that there should not be the economic inequality. Alright, and if economic inequality is not there, he is giving the initial ideas towards socialism. This is a significance when UPSC is asking the question, his contribution, तो इस contribution में ये वाले points लिखने हैं, empathy वाला हो गया, governance वाला part आ गया, nation state, socialistic orientation, all these they were the contribution of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. ठीक है, so अगर हम enlightenment का part देखें, so this is it. In Enlightenment, UPSC is asking about the factors. Scientific revolution वाला 2 बार पूछ चुका है. They're asking about the features which we have seen already. Okay, they're asking about the ideas of Kant as well as Rousseau. One area where you may find question, that is enlightened despotism. वहाँ आने के chances बहुत ज़्यादा हैं. काफ़ी time हो चुका है. There is a specific personality known as Lord Acton. He uses the word the repentance of monarchy for these 18th century monarch, meaning some of the monarchs like Catherine the Great, Frederick the Great, Joseph II, Charles, the repentance मतलब कुछ गलत किया था पहले generations ने, अब उसको सुधार रहे हैं, and that's why it is known as enlightened despotism. So you can use his name in introduction or conclusion if a question comes on enlightened despotism. Now we have to shift toward the concept of socialism. Socialism, it was a byproduct of the beginning of Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the middle of 18th century. The moment it began, it came out with certain challenges. Challenges with respect to the condition of labor, like the working conditions, they were not safe. The pay, salary, it was not on time. They were not enjoying any kind of holiday. Social security was not there. So in general you can say that there was no labor laws. ना आज की वीडियो हमारे पास बहुत सारे labor laws हैं which protects the labor. So all those things were non-existent. So socialism, it was a believer that as a result of industrial revolution, society has got divided into two classes. The class which is protecting the factors of production, it becomes capitalist, and the class which is providing its labor, or the working class, it becomes labor class or working class. So this is how some of the scholars, they started saying that there should be certain changes in the changes of these factories. ऐसे काम नहीं चल पाएगा. They should have housing facilities. They should not be forced to live in slums. They should be ensured that there should be working condition. They should not be harmful to their human health, because there are industries like coal, chemical industries. If you're working in them, eventually it can directly affect your health. So इसी को बोलते हैं ना occupational hazards, right? So that's a kind of occupational hazard which was affected to these laborers. That's why socialism started becoming important. So just see the definition. Socialism is a philosophy that encompasses a variety of economic and social structures marked by social ownership of means of production and democratic control or workers' self-management of businesses. The goal is to ensure that production responds to general public's needs and desire, and goods and services are distributed fairly. So in general, this promotes equity in the society. Then significance क्या क्या है? So it says that it brings in greater economic efficiency, okay, because if we have planned authorities, like in India also had planning commission, so if the resources are pooled, it can lead to better source of planning. Its positive were seen even in the case of USSR, where the planned economic development made it one of the most advanced country in the world. General welfare, this is important. Even if the first one, it can be contested, that greater economic efficiency as per Adam Smith, it is only going to come into the capitalism because of the factor of innovation. Because socialism एक बहुत बड़ी problem है, क्या चीज़ नहीं आती? Innovation. Innovation बहुत दिक्कत है वहाँ पे. Here greater welfare, yes, it's going to happen. The control over monopolistic practices, that can also be ensured, and finally absence of business fluctuations. Next, demerits. Okay, the demerits that we have of the socialism, kindly see the demerits. जैसे सबसे पहला जो है, it affects all of us. What is it? आप सबके पास कौन सा फोन है? लावा? हाँ, माइक्रोमैक्स. So what happens eventually, that if socialism is promoted, it kills innovation, because if the goods and services are going to be distributed fairly, कोई मेहनत करेगा ही नहीं. That's the problem. Motivation नहीं आती अंदर से कि हम क्यों करें. Why are people ready to go and join startups rather than eventually going for salary? What's the logic behind it? Because they know if the company is able to run, they will become multi-millionaire or even billionaire. What's the reason for that? It's pure innovation. ना innovation है वो, motivation उसी से ही आता है. You're able to do so. Second, no freedom of occupation. In majority of the cases, we have seen this case in USSR. Misallocation of resources, it also happens. Like when central planning authority, it fails, तब क्या करें? India had these 12 5-year plans, है ना, 12 रहे. To what extent they were successful or not successful, we are not able to understand. Why? Because वो किस तरीके से सोच रहे थे, पता नहीं. And finally, this is the biggest problem, bureaucratic hurdles, because in socialism, the problems of corruption, they are very high. है ना, the red tape that we talk about. What is this red tape? क्यों बोलते हैं red tape? फाइल्स के ऊपर red tape लगा के रख देते हैं, उसको आगे जाने ही नहीं देते हैं, है ना. तो corruption greases the wheels of the system. जब corruption, जब पैसा मिलता है तब वो फाइल आगे बढ़ती है. So India has faced इंस्पेक्टर राज, है ना, बहुत टाइम तक हमने ये फेस किया. सोशलिज्म पे डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन यूपीएससी ऐसे तो पूछने वाला है नहीं. द जनरल डिस्कशन दैट वी आर हैविंग कि व्हाट इज द डेफिनेशन ऑफ सोशलिज्म, क्यों सोशलिज्म आया, तो इसका पूरा पर्सपेक्टिव था बिकॉज वी हैड सीन द बिगिनिंग ऑफ इंडस्ट्रियल revolution, and in this industrial revolution setup, the capitalists, they were becoming richer. At the same time, the working conditions, they were poor for the laborers. They were not able to live a dignified human life. This dignified human life can only come if they are getting regular pay, if the working conditions are safe, if they're getting the housing facilities, they're getting certain holidays to live, or there should be a work-life balance. So all those things, they were missing in the setup of England. You must have read this famous novel known as Hard Times, है ना, किसका है? Charles Dickens. So he has written this Hard Times. So in this Hard Times, he talks about the status of labor class in England. कि भाई कितनी ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम हो गई है. He says that factories has become the pyramids of slavery. कि बड़ी बड़ी फैक्ट्री बन गई है, उसके अंदर क्या हो रही है? मॉडर्न स्लेवरी हो रही है. These laborers, they do not have any kind of right. neither they can go and bargain for their salaries, neither they can have the safe working condition. They are residing in the slums, they have zero privacy in the slums. Okay, they are having various kinds of health issues because of that. So that's why the labor class was not having anything which can improve their life. That's why the initial phase, when we talk about socialism, there are two phases that we have. The first phase of socialism is known as utopian socialism. The second phase, it is known as Marxism. The word utopia, it comes from a novel. Okay, this was a novel which was written during 16th 17th century, which talks about a perfect community where everybody could live together, अच्छे तरीके से, जैसे TV serials में होता है, right? That perfect community is there. So from there, the word utopia was picked up by Karl Marx, and all the initial socialists, they were given the title of utopian socialism. Why utopian socialism? We have to understand it. उनको यूटोपियन सोशलिस्ट क्यों बोला गया? So first we'll read about them and then we'll decide can we call them utopian or not. यूटोपियन कौन होता है? Utopian is somebody who doesn't see the reality as it is, who doesn't know how to address a specific kind of situation. वो सोचता है कि हाँ चलो ठीक है कि बैठे रहो, हो जाएगा शायद अपने आप. And that is utopia. Let us see. So when we talk about socialism, the early socialists, they came from various countries. Okay, we see these socialists like Thomas Paine. Okay, Thomas Paine in his book Rights of Men, he talks about that all men are born with God-given right that cannot be taken away by any government, and his position on inalienable right played a major role in the Bill of Rights, which was included in the US Constitution. Then we have Charles Leonard Sismondi, बहुत लंबा नाम है, ठीक है. So he was a Swiss, तो इसको सिर्फ easy याद रखो, Charles Leonard. Okay, इतना बहुत है इनके लिए. So in 1818 he was a Swiss historian. He stressed that states should interfere in the field of economy in order to avert the evils of social revolution. This is what he talked about. Then we have William Godwin. He condemned the concept of personal property. Then we had some more socialists which are more prominent in England, like the most important one which you will remember for your exam. It is Robert Owen. You have to remember his name. He is the most important personality. Okay, so he was one of the first person to coin the term socialism term in 1830. He himself was a factory owner and brought reforms in his factory. Due to his effort, okay, Britain passed the Cotton Mill and the Factories Act of 1819, which was the first United Kingdom Act of Parliament to attempt to regulate the hours and condition of the work of children in the cotton industry. He explained in his principle in the New View of Society and the book of New Moral World. He also considered the father of cooperative societies. He says that cooperative society of the workers and collective membership in the factories. So Robert Owen is very, very important for us. He came out with various reforms. He motivated his workforce, and to the amazement of the people around him, profit also increased. So he was somebody who was able to prove the efficacy of socialism, but only at the level of his own factories, and he was a supporter of the labor rights. Then we have Charles Kingsley and Denison Morris. So they were the Christian socialists, okay, who launched a peaceful movement to improve the condition of workers. William Thompson, John Gray, they also proposed distribution of profit among workers and owners. France was the most volatile state, and this was having one of the highest level of philosophy. Philosophy में सबसे आगे रहते हैं, कोई भी चीज़ हो, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, with respect to socialism also. See Francis Babeuf. So he tried to establish a communist state, for which he and his friends, they were hanged in 1797. He is considered as the father of French communism. Then we have Henry de Saint-Simon. Saint-Simon is again important, and he was a follower of Christianity. He postulated his thoughts about socialism, okay, and he realized that even after revolution of 1789, proletariat or the working class has not gained significantly. So two characteristics of his message were that economic thoughts shine with humanistic optimism, and secondly, he said that major focus should be given to science and industry. So Saint Simon is an important person you have to remember. Third is Charles Fourier. Again, he criticized the work of Simon, and he agreed that the end of capitalism was only way to end the plight of workers. And finally comes Louis Blanc. When you read socialism, you get various kinds of terms like state socialism होता है, Fabian socialism होता है, ऐसे बहुत सारी terms आती हैं. So one of the earliest person to support state socialism, the concept of PSUs that we have, the name is Louis Blanc. You have to remember his name. Okay, UPSC ने question पूछ लिया था इनके ऊपर पूरा 20 marker. So he was the most influential socialist after 1840s. There was a revolution in France in 1848. After that, he became the labor minister. And when he became the labor minister, he said that there should be workshops. There should be state workshop, and through these, the workers their benefits should be ensured. So he was somebody who believed in state socialism. He demanded national factories or social workshop to gain right to work. He was confident of bringing out socialism by means of revolutionary conspiracy. He played significant role in the aftermath of 1848. However, by the time of 1852, he was not able to stay in the place, and these reforms eventually failed. If we see the case of Germany, in Germany we has Boucher. So he advocated a social revolution. He even founded a committee known as the Right of Men, which maintained that political revolution should essentially be accompanied by social revolution. And all of us say that political democracy is meaningless without social democracy. So these are the people who initially talked about it. Again, there was Ferdinand Lassalle. So he was pioneered by Ferdinand Lassalle, and he was a successful revolutionary. He talked about this General Association of German Workers in 1863. He even emphasized about labor movement. So early socialist thoughts, they were coming in various countries. Okay. See, in the case of Germany, large number of these organizations eventually merged, and one of them was the League of Just in 1836, which worked in Paris. Karl Marx and Engels, they became its members. In 1847, it was renamed as Communist League and incorporated following objectives in its declaration: annihilation of capitalist class, reign of working class, total abolition of middle class and old society based class discrimination, formation of new classless society. Look, class is an economic concept. Okay, higher class, middle class, lower class, किस basis पे बनता है? On the basis of your income. And with no personal property, there should be no personal property. The League's magazine reiterated the slogan "Workers of the whole world unite," and it commissioned Karl Marx and Engels to prepare a declaration charter, जो कि Communist Manifesto बनेगा in 1848. In 1867, eventually we'll see the coming of the major work of Karl Marx, which is known as Das Kapital, and this Das Kapital has 3 volumes, and one of them was published in 1890s. By that time, Karl Marx was already dead. So Frederick Engels played a very important role in the promotion of Marxism. तो बाद में बात करेंगे उसके बारे में. Let us now try to understand what are the limitations. Why were they called utopian? इसका reason क्या है? Number 1, majority of these people, they are taking individual initiatives. They are taking individual initiative, like Robert Owen. Okay, he was able to reform his own factory, came out with cooperative movement. However, do you think that this is going to be followed by all the capitalist people? It was not going to happen. Gandhi ji believed in trusteeship. कि दिल है ना, trust, you are a trustee. Eventually कितने लोगों ने trust को maintain किया? Those who are having the power, it's very difficult for them to share it with others. It could be any form of political or economic power. So one of the major limitations of these early socialists, that they are doing these individual initiatives. Second, they are not able to mobilize. They are not able to mobilize labor. They are not mobilizing the labor. Labor class is not mobilized, and since they are not mobilized, eventually long-term changes will only happen when the state is going to take its steps. Like आज के दिन में देखो, कौन labor laws को ensure कर रहा है? It is the state. It is not that it is only because of corporate governance where labor laws are being followed, right? So this was a big problem with the early socialists. Third, they were trying to ensure changes within the capitalist order. They were trying to change, okay, they were trying to change, or they were trying to bring in the positives for the worker within the capitalist order. They were not challenging it as such कि भाई इसको खत्म कर देंगे, बातें करी होंगी एक दो ने, but they did not counter it. Number 4, they did not seek a major role for the state, which we have just seen. Only Louis Blanc, he talked about that there should be workshops. In fact, कभी transition की बात भी आ जाए with respect to socialism, तो transition में Louis Blanc आते हैं, because Louis Blanc talks about the role of state. The early one, they did not talk about the state. What will be the role of state with respect to socialism? Because unless there is a specific policy, laws are created by the state, they will not be implemented. As a result of all of this, Karl Marx said these people were utopian and there is no scientific socialism in this. कुछ समझ ही नहीं आता, इंडिविजुअल सबके आइडियाज हैं. somebody is talking about cooperatives, somebody says कि नहीं ये नहीं होना चाहिए वो होना चाहिए, उससे कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ रहा है. दैट्स वाई इसके कुछ ज़्यादा मेजर रिजल्ट नहीं प्रोड्यूस हुए. UPSC has asked this question many times. You can see question number 17 in your PYQ. How would you explain the nature of pre-Marxian socialism? It's a 10-marker question. Okay, it's a 10-marker question and you can easily write the nature. That what was the nature? Number 1, majority of them, they were individual initiative. Write the example of Robert Owen. ठीक है, वो वहाँ पे साथ में लिखोगे. Second, that they were not able to mobilize labor at max like Robert Owen. They did within their factories, but they were not mobilizing. They did not make them conscious about it. When Karl Marx is saying workers of the world unite, he is making a kind of labor consciousness कि तुम सब labor हो, you're all proletariat, है ना? You have to unite and then only you can fight against the bourgeois. That labor consciousness could not get developed because mobilization was missing, because they were individual initiatives. Number 3, as we have discussed, they were trying to reform, they were trying to ensure the betterment of the worker within the framework of capitalism, and that was a major weakness, because unless capitalism was at least either controlled by the state or it is taken over by the communism, the long-term welfare was not going to be possible. Sporadic initiative may be taken by few people like Tatas, है ना, कुछ लोग ले सकते हैं, but everybody do not have that kind of capacity. And finally, the role of state was not envisioned by them. How the role of state is going to be there. Alright, neither they told how in the long run socialism is going to win. So कुछ भी इन्होंने define नहीं किया. And as a result of this, we see Karl Marx calling them utopian. कि बस हवा में बातें करते रहे कि हो जाएगा बहुत बढ़िया, सोशलिज्म अच्छा चलेगा, है ना, स्कीम आ गई थी एक, इससे कुछ होना जाना था नहीं था. अब इसको डिफाइन करेंगे कार्ल मार्क्स. हाउ? फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल he'll focus on labor consciousness. When he says labor of the world unite, okay, workers of the world unite, what is he trying to do? Make them conscious. He is turning this movement into a political movement. Once they become conscious, it can become a political movement. Then he also gives them a specific aim that we have to abolish capitalism. And how capitalism is going to get abolished? Through a violent revolution. That a violent revolution is going to be required, through which the proletariat are going to defeat the bourgeois. Okay, that also he defined, and he also put a final aim. The final aim was to create a classless society. Okay, he also published specific works like Communist Manifesto. Communist Manifesto was published in 1848. Then Das Kapital, It was published around 1867. So specific ideology was also coming up with this text. So all the lacunas which were there in the early socialism, they were understood by him, and that's why he called this form of socialism scientific socialism. Scientific socialism क्यों? Which is the specific class which is suffering? It is the labor class. Make them conscious, unite. Once they will unite, it can be channelized into a political movement. Once a political movement is channelized, what can be done? They can capture the state, and once they capture the state, they can abolish capitalism, and the concept of private property will be abolished forever and ever. And this will be achieved, balidan to dena padega. This will be achieved through violent revolution, and finally it will lead to the creation of classless society in the long run. अब इसके लिए उन्होंने एक पिच भी तैयार करी, जैसे स्टार्टअप वाले पिच बनाते हैं ना, इतना इतना पैसा कर देंगे, इतनी हमारी मार्केट पोटेंशियल है. So he came out with this also. He says that if we see history, what has happened in history, in every phase, one class has exploited the other. So he says that if we go towards ancient part, so in ancient we have the master who had exploited the slave. In medieval era, he talks about the feudal lords, and they were exploiting the serfs. And in the modern era, he says it is these bourgeois, and bourgeois is exploiting the proletariat. अब इतना समझाने के बाद तो यूनाइट होना ही पड़ेगा ना, ठीक है. So he has given this concept that history, right, that throughout history one class has been exploiting the others, and this is the opportunity for all of you proletariat, rise. सुनते सुनते ही मन करेगा हाँ चलो, we have to rise. That's the question they asked this year in 2023. Marxian socialism claims itself to be a scientific socialist theory. We have discussed why it is a scientific theory capable of explaining the history of humankind, at how the history of humankind has came in front of us, master, slave, feudal lord, serf. And he says that these people were not able to rise, but this is the golden opportunity for the proletariat. They should come, unite, and now we can take over this bourgeois class. So this is how he used this concept which is known as historical materialism. Okay, कि भाई हिस्ट्री में मोस्टली इकोनॉमी के बेसिस पे ही चेंजेस हुए हैं, एंड दैट्स व्हाई द होल थीम ऑफ हिस्ट्री, जब हम मार्क्सियन स्कूल ऑफ हिस्ट्री बोलते हैं, तो मार्क्सियन स्कूल ऑफ हिस्ट्री बिलीव्स इन इकोनॉमिक interpretation. Why the concept of feudalism comes in? Because feudalism is nothing but it's a concept related to economy, where land becomes more important than secondary economic activities, right? So this is what he believed in. So we have just discussed briefly that there were certain problems, okay, which were there in the early socialists. If you look at any one of them, Saint Simon, Charles Fourier, all of them, they are individual initiatives. They are separated by various geographies. Okay, it happened with Karl Marx also. Karl Marx initially was in Prussia. From there he went to France. He was exiled from there. Tried to go to Belgium. He was exiled. Eventually he came to London. That's why he was able to make a very good theory, because London was pure capitalism. Right? Industrial revolution has already happened on a large scale in England. And that's why he formulated his ideology. And England, since it was a liberal kind of order, they allowed कि चलो ठीक है, time pass कर लो, लिख लो communism, देखेंगे. That is important, because when he died, not even 50 people show up. He died in 1883. 50 लोग भी नहीं आए थे funeral के time पे. But within next 3 decades, the whole world was going to be divided on the theory of Marxism. That was the impact of Karl Marx. Karl Marx died in 1883. However, his ideas was still put forward by Frederick Engels. Frederick Engels was one of his friend. Frederick Engels' father was having a factory. ठीक है, Frederick Engels, he was a rich person. His father was having a factory. Karl Marx, उनका मन करता था बस थियरी लिखने का. He was not having money, so he required a friend who could sponsor. So Frederick Engels took care of him with respect to money. Okay, he even helped him in identifying the problems in socialism, and that's why together they had written Communist Manifesto. दोनों साथ मिलके लिखा था. नाम सिर्फ कार्ल मार्क्स का आता है, बट साथ मिलके लिखा था. Eventually, he was the one who edited the Das Kapital, the third volume. It was published in 1890s because Frederick Engels lived till 1895. 12 साल ज़्यादा जिंदा रहे कार्ल मार्क्स से. तो जो थर्ड वॉल्यूम था उन्होंने खुद पब्लिश की थी इन द नेम ऑफ कार्ल मार्क्स, यानी कि एंगलिज्म लिख दिया वहाँ पे, राइट, कार्ल मार्क्स, राइट. And he also promoted, because these socialists, they used to believe in internationals, that we are going to have international. So they are first international and second international. So in the second international, when Karl Marx was no more, at that point of time, eventually he also publicized the ideas of Karl Marx. तो यूपीएससी ने इस दोस्ती के ऊपर एक क्वेश्चन पूछा था, क्वेश्चन नंबर 16. Okay, Engels did much more than Marx himself to popularize the ideas of Marxism. तो पैसे से भी हेल्प किया, आइडिया से भी हेल्प किया, इंटरनेशनल कन्वेंशंस का भी पार्ट बने, और जब दोस्त ना रहा तब भी उन्हीं आइडियाज़ के पीछे लगे रहे. सो और उसकी पूरी जो थियरीज है उनको कोहेसिव और कोहेरेंट बनाने में उन्होंने काफ़ी रोल प्ले किया था. तो ये क्वेश्चन देखो एकदम से आउट ऑफ द ब्लू आ गया. अब जिसने अच्छे से पढ़ा हुआ था वो तो कर सकता है, लेकिन ये नॉर्मली होता नहीं है कहीं पे. दैट्स व्हाई आई हैव डिस्कस्ड इट विद यू कि भाई कभी कभार थोड़ी सी एक्स्ट्रा स्टोरी पता होती है तो फायदा हो जाता है. इतना भी पता ना कौन पहले जिंदा, कौन पहले गया, कौन बाद तक रहा है, तब भी एक पॉइंट एक्स्ट्रा बन जाता है, राइट. सो कार्ल मार्क्स डाइड इन 1883 एंड फ्रेडरिक एंगल लिव्ड टिल 1895. So during that phase he was supporting his ideas, taking it to the international conventions. That's why this question has been asked. Please see question number 15. Is this clear to all of you? Marxian socialism claims itself to be scientific socialist theory capable of explaining the history of humankind. Discuss. Question number 16 we have just discussed. Question number 17 is again we have discussed this. How would you explain the nature of pre-Marxian socialism? So that we have already discussed. इन्हीं की limitations के basis पे क्या बनता है, scientific socialism बन जाता है. All right. Then see this question number 19. Karl Marx applied his critical intelligence to wealth of nation, where Smith had only seen the sunlight. Marx saw only the shadows thrown upon the human scene by the unimpeded exercise of individual liberty, and the keyword is elucidate. Whenever we see the keyword elucidate, it just means simplify, कि जो ऊपर लिखा उसको बताओ, समझ आया कि नहीं आया तुम्हें, ठीक है. Now the classic condition is this. Adam Smith he was a believer in capitalism, while if we see Karl Marx, he was a believer in communism. So there were certain positives which were identified by Adam Smith. Okay, सबसे बड़ा positive क्या था इनका capitalism के लिए? That it is because of capitalism that we'll see the increase of the wealth of nations. Second, it talks about that it brings it innovation. Okay, it brings in innovation. Innovation बहुत ज़्यादा आता है. And how does this happen? Because when people see motivation that if they will work hard, eventually they will be paid for it. Okay, लोग क्यों startups में 10-10 साल लाइफ लगाते हैं अपनी? What's the reason for it? Because eventually they will create innovation, और innovation से क्या मिलेगा finally? Reward. That reward principle is very important in capitalism. Third, he eventually talked about that if the economic activity are not impeded by the government, there should be free market capitalism. It unleashes the forces of demand and supply, which increases employment in the economy. कि demand और supply अगर natural तरीके से चल रहे हैं, अगर artificial demand होगी, artificial supply होगा, तो वो ज़्यादा देर तक नहीं रह पाएगा. Like see in your agriculture sector, है ना, एकदम से गवर्नमेंट कहती है आज से एग्रीकल्चर एक्सपोर्ट बंद. So is it respecting the forces of demand and supply? No, it is not respecting, because they all know if inflation will happen before election. हर बार होता है ये, इलेक्शन से 6 महीने पहले, ठीक है, जो भी अपनी फूड है उसका जितना भी एक्सपोर्ट होता है उसको कम कर देते हैं. क्यों? अपनी इकोनॉमी में इन्फ्लेशन नहीं होना चाहिए, बाकी सब देखा जाएगा, इनकम वगैरह बाकी देखेंगे, बट दिस शुड नॉट हैपन. सो दे से दैट if the free market capitalism is going to be established, it's going to lead to higher employment. So all the positives were seen by Adam Smith in the capitalism. That is what is written here, that Karl Marx applied his critical intelligence to the wealth of nation. Wealth of nation was written by Adam Smith, where Smith had only seen the sunlight. उनको सिर्फ positive दिखे of capitalism. So you have to write about the positives of capitalism. Okay, the positives of capitalism, because investment भी ज़्यादा हो पाता है, because private investment it always supplement the state investment. अगर हम सिर्फ कम्युनिज्म देखेंगे तो कम्युनिज्म में प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट का तो कोई लॉजिक ही नहीं है. एंड एज ऑल ऑफ अस नो, इन्वेस्टमेंट रेट जब किसी भी इकोनॉमी में हाई होता है तो ग्रोथ क्या होती है? हायर होती है. तो ओवरऑल ग्रोथ हाई होती है. अगर इन्वेस्टमेंट कैपिटल फॉर्मेशन होगा तो वो कैसे होगा? इफ देयर इज बोथ पब्लिक एज वेल एज प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट. सो ही हैड ओनली सीन द पॉजिटिव्स. तो ये बहुत अच्छी लाइन है, आप रट लो अगर कभी भी यूटिलाइज करना हो एस्से वगैरह में भी, ठीक है, क्योंकि कैपिटलिज्म के ऊपर कई बार आ चुका है एस्से यूपीएससी में, वेयर दे आस्क दिस क्वेश्चन दैट कैन कैपिटलिज्म लीड टू इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ इन इंडिया. इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ आई होप ऑल ऑफ इंडिया, सबका साथ सबका विकास सबका प्रयास, दैट इज इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ, कि सबको सब कुछ मिल जाना चाहिए. देन Marx saw only the shadows thrown upon the human scene. He only saw the shadows. What were those shadows? That it is not the wealth of nation, it is only the wealth of capitalists. Second, he says that innovation, but innovation only comes in those areas where they get the maximum profit. They only care about profit, they don't care about anything else. Third, he says that even if they provide employment, they do not provide any kind of social security. That is missing. So that's why it became a classic case where one person is a diehard fan of capitalism, while the other is completely he is a believer in private property. He wants the abolishment of private property. So it becomes a kind of difference between these two personalities, and that's the question which was asked in 2016. और बहुत ही easy है, by unimpeded exercise of individual liberty. Why? Because he says that state should have zero interference in the economic activities. That if you have that kind of individual liberty, then, but it was criticized by Karl Marx. So बस इसमें दोनों perspective लिखने हैं, capitalism and its negatives which were seen by Karl Marx. In between you can even use the name of the scholars. कहाँ पे scholars जो हमने बात किया है initial वाले, उनका भी नाम लिख सकते हो कि how the criticism was coming forward. This is question number 19, relatively very easy. Question number 18, with the writings of Karl Marx, socialism assumed the form of scientific socialism. I hope that is also clear. In the first half you'll write about how socialism origins, what were its limitation of the early phase, and then you'll write how the remedy was provided by Karl Marx. So with the writings of him, it assumed the form of scientific socialism. It means पहले दिक्कत थी, तो वो जो assumption है उससे पहले आप problems लिखेंगे उसके बारे में. See question number 21. If we were to define our conception of state, our answer would be that state is the banker of the poor. The government would finance and supervise the purchase of productive equipments and the formation of workshop. तो किसकी बात कर रहे हैं? PSUs बनाने की. In the light of the above statement of Louis Blanc, throw light on the pre-Marxist socialist thought in Europe. As it is आपके handout में दिया हुआ है. What were the various thought of socialism? सबके बारे में आपने डिटेल में लिखना है और थोड़ा सा इसके नेचर के बारे में बताना है. What is the nature of this Marxism? The nature of pre-Marxian thoughts. उसको भी एक कमेंट लिखना है, बट पहले कंट्री वाइज बता देना है कि फ्रांस में कौन सा है, जर्मनी में कौन सा है, उस तरीके से उसको डिवाइड कर देना. दैट इज व्हाट दे आर आस्किंग इन क्वेश्चन नंबर 21. इट्स अ वेरी स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड क्वेश्चन. देन क्वेश्चन नंबर 20 and question number 22, they are exactly same. Question number 20 says France was more fertile than Britain in producing new socialist theories and movements, though they bore less concrete result in France than in Britain. Critically examine. So we already know कि फ्रांस में कितनी थियरीज आई और ब्रिटेन में कौन सी थियरीज आई, बट मेजर रिजल्ट फ्रांस में क्यों नहीं प्रोड्यूस हुआ, उसके रीजन क्या है? why the results of socialism were not there? Because in case of Britain they were able to come up with Factory Act, like हमने अभी देखा है ना, Factory Act, Mines Act, Public Health Act, वो सारे एक्ट लेके आ गए थे in the 19th century, but this could not happen in France. and इसका जो सबसे बड़ा रीजन है, it is political instability. Since France was going through the phase of political instability, 1789 beginning of revolution till 1999 the revolution is there, then Napoleon is going to fight his war from 1799 to 1815, then little bit of breathing space for 15 years, 1830 again one revolution in France, 1848 again revolution. तो revolution चलते ही रहे, रुकते ही तो नहीं है. So that's why one of the biggest reason why France could not establish socialism in its public policy, the reason is political instability. Second, the level of industrialization, it was low in France in comparison to Britain. That's why the exploitation of the masses were also on the lower side, and that's why उतना policy के लिए clamoring change भी नहीं था. England was the most industrialized country. In fact, when it was going through the first phase of industrialization, this was the only country to have any form of industrialization from 1750s till 1790s. Then the other countries started picking up the pace. So that's why the level of industrialization was low in France initially, and this was also the reason why it was not required to specifically pursue any kind of policy with respect to that. So इसमें second part में आप ये लिखेंगे, first part में वही answer आएगा आपका. You'll write people in Britain like रॉबर्ट ओवेन वगैरह के बारे में लिखेंगे, बट इन फ्रांस यहाँ पे आप रूसो को भी लिख सकते हो. डिस्कोर्स ऑन द ओरिजिन ऑफ इनइक्वालिटी, दैट इज ऑल्सो वन ऑफ द आइडिया ऑफ सोशलिज्म. तो 4-5 के बारे में आप यहाँ लिखोगे, सेंट साइमन, ओके, फ्रांसिस बेबोफ, वो सब आपका. सो तो क्वेश्चन नंबर 20 and 22 दे आर एग्जैक्टली सेम. प्लीज कम टू नाउ पेज नंबर 13 ऑफ योर हैंड आउट. लेट अस नाउ हैव अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ डिस्कशन अबाउट कार्ल मार्क्स एंड हिज आइडियाज. The basic thing is clear to all of you. Okay, what was he was able to come up with? क्या लेकुनास से पहले के सोशलिज्म में लेबर कॉन्शियसनेस की कमी थी, तो ही डेवलप्ड दैट हम सब वर्कर हैं, हम सब साथ में आएंगे, ठीक है, लेबर कॉन्शियसनेस. सेकंड, he turned this into a political movement. He tried to do so during his time, right? Then he was able to identify the main problem was in the structure itself. अच्छा, यूट्यूब पे चलता है ना, सिस्टम ही खराब है. सो कैपिटलिज्म, राइट, सो कैपिटलिज्म इज समथिंग, द सिस्टम इज इन इटसेल्फ बैड, एंड दैट्स व्हाई वी शुड गो टुवर्ड्स अ वायलेंट रेवोल्यूशन. वायलेंट रेवोल्यूशन इज गोइंग टू बी रिक्वायर्ड. दैट्स व्हाई देयर इज अ फंडामेंटल डिफरेंस बिटवीन गांधी जी एंड कार्ल मार्क्स. बोथ ऑफ देम दे बिलीव इन द सेम आउटकम, क्लासलेस सोसाइटी. अब तो यूपीएससी में पीवाईक्यू सॉल्व कर लिया होगा, बट व्हेन दिस वाज आस्क्ड इन 2018-19 वेरी फ्यू पीपल न्यू अबाउट इट कि हाँ, गांधी जी के साथ सिमिलरिटी हो सकती है कार्ल मार्क्स की, है ना, कैसे हो सकती है, इतनी बड़ी दाढ़ी लेके घूम रहे हो, अलग अलग दुनिया, लेबर कॉन्शियस, वर्कर्स ऑफ द वर्ल्ड यूनाइट, वायलेंट रेवोल्यूशन, बट वन थिंग इज कॉमन बिटवीन देम, बोथ ऑफ देम दे बिलीव इन क्लासलेस सोसाइटी. क्लासलेस सोसाइटी मीन्स डिस्क्रिमिनेशन, तो फिर स्टेट चाहिए ना वापस. क्लासलेस सोसाइटी मीन्स देयर इज नॉट गोइंग टू बी एनीबॉडी. ओके, समझाते हैं अभी कंसेप्ट. बट दे बिलीव दैट इनिशियली वी रिक्वायर स्टेट, है ना, स्टेट की रिक्वायर्ड होगी. वाई स्टेट इज रिक्वायर्ड? सो दैट द होल कैपिटलिस्ट क्लास दिस कैन बी ब्रॉट टू जीरो, है ना. तो प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी को हम खत्म करेंगे. वंस द स्टेट इज सक्सेसफुल इन एस्टैब्लिशिंग द डिक्टेटरशिप ऑफ द प्रोलेटेरिएट, द नेक्स्ट पॉइंट वुड बी दैट साइमल्टेनियसली we are going to set up communes. Communes is nothing but these are the local panchayat level type, समझ लो, ठीक है. तो local organization, and these communes will become self-sustaining organizations, and that's how, when we do not have the private property, when we do not have any requirement of state, later on it will become a classless society, society which has no economic differentiation. अब किसी के पास प्रॉपर्टी है ही नहीं, अगर सब हर कोई वर्कर है, देयर इज नो डिफरेंशिएशन बिटवीन देम. दैट्स व्हाई इन द एंड दे सेड वी विल नॉट इवन बी रिक्वायरिंग स्टेट, लोकल लेवल पे ही सब कुछ हो जाएगा. बट इनिशियली सेंट्रलाइजेशन विल बी रिक्वायर्ड सो दैट द प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी कैन बी abolished everywhere. This is how, and Gandhi ji also was believer in this. In 1947 he was asked, अब क्या करना है कांग्रेस को? He said disband it. We are free now, we don't require Congress. Anyway, so Karl Marx, please see his background. So he was a Jewish-born German. Okay, left the University of Bonn after 1 year. He was studying law, joined the University of Berlin to study history and philosophy. In 1841, he was also given a doctorate by University of Jena. So very meticulous personality. 1842, he became the editor of Rhine newspaper, but due to fierce writing criticism of Prussian administration, the newspaper was censored. Moved to Paris, 1843. Here he meet Saint Simon, Charles Fourier, and there he developed friendly bond with Frederick Engels. However, due to revolutionary activities, French government too exiled him, and he went to Brussels. इसमें ये थोड़ा सा फिगर में मिस्टेक है, 1945 नहीं 1845 है ना, स्पिरिट नहीं बचा था उनका कि बाद में आएगा 100 साल बाद. So during his stay in Brussels in 1845, he began to plan for the active cooperation and collaboration of the socialist group and traveled extensively to meet many such groups. And as a result of this, an international communist league was formed, and in December 1947, and in Feb, इसको आप exact अगर day याद रखना तो याद कर सकते हो, 2nd Feb 1848. It was 2nd Feb 1848 on which he presented to delegates a communist manifesto. Okay, this manifesto set out his principles and practical paths and the way to achieve it, and advocated series of reform that were too radical. After a series of revolutions occurred, okay, but Karl Marx's willingness to support them propelled even Belgium authority to also exile him. तो घूम फिर के लास्ट में एक ही जगह बचती है सबके लिए, and that is England, कि चलो अब इंग्लैंड चलते हैं. So he in 1848 he migrated to London and he stayed there for the rest of his life. And here he developed his theories to the perfection, and by 1867 these consolidated thoughts took the shape of Das Kapital, in which he fully covers his ideologies. And in this he analyzes the working process of capitalism. So when we are writing about this answer, differences between Adam Smith and Karl Marx, तो यहाँ लिखना है किसके अंदर ये डिस्कस करते हैं the working of capitalism, ठीक है, and hinted at those specific activities that would bring an end of capitalism. क्यों ये capitalism खत्म होगा? He clarified that economic crisis can be solved only when an individual monopoly of sources of production is eliminated and personal profit motive is removed from the production system, and thus he supported nationalization. So nationalization तो process है ही. Once the dictatorship is established of the proletariat, it leads to nationalization of resources. Nobody is going to be rich, nobody is going to be poor, everybody becomes equal. But reality में देखो वो नहीं होता, जिसके हाथ में power आती है again they become rich. Next, the important doctrines that he was able to come up with, it includes determination of economic interpretation of history, dialectical materialism, class struggle and labor value theory. We have to understand these concepts. इनका मतलब क्या क्या है? Because class struggle is very important. Like Gandhiji believes in class cooperation. Okay, the labor class and the industrialist class, they can work together. However, he says that it's not going to work. We only have one thing, that is class struggle. We have to struggle our way to ensure that the bourgeois are going to be defeated. See his economic determinism. He promises that victory to working class, but asks them to make sacrifices in order to bring about essential development. But as Marx himself said, the fall of capitalism is inevitable. Why workers shall sacrifice themselves? This is the fundamental problem that Marx or his followers failed to answer. Initially he said capitalism khatam hoga. Like we have only seen, so why do we see large number of economic problems? We see economic depression of 1929. Okay, we also see this 2008 recession. So these are the problems of capitalism. अब इसको pure capitalism बोलेंगे या chronic capitalism बोलेंगे, that is something which we do not know exactly. क्या exactly responsible है उसके लिए? But he had predicted that these kinds of crises are going to come very regularly in the capitalism. But if the crises are going to come and it is going to downfall, तो जरूरत ही क्यों है आप लोगों को fight करने की? This was not answered by Karl Marx. Second, this materialistic concept of history or economic interpretation means that economic structure of society in a particular period influences its political, social, intellectual and moral climate. However, he failed to answer clear-cut definition of the word economic, and thus causing lot of dilemma among his followers. That's why the whole historian who uses economy as the most important element for ensuring, like they say, if we see the creation of empire, तो ये बात नहीं करेंगे that the king was strong. They will say there was iron. Why? Because iron becomes a materialistic character state. That we in ancient India we have this debate that during the second urbanization, what was the most important factor responsible for urbanization? And R.S. Sharma says it is iron, because they always believe in economic interpretation of history. कि iron था, economy strong थी, that's why empire बना. Everything else is immaterial. And this is exactly the same. The materialistic concept of history, that the whole of history of humankind has been shaped by certain economic events, and that's how it moved forward. Similarly, early medieval period, they talk about feudalism. Once we see the beginning of feudalism then affects the political, social, economic and the cultural part of the society. Then he adopted Hegel's interpretation of dialect. ये आपको याद रखना है. Okay, we discussed about Hegel. Hegel was a believer in idealism, and he used to say man is nothing but a product of his thoughts. Whatever we think, we become that. This is idealism. Okay, and this was believed by Hegel, but this was changed by Karl Marx. Karl Marx says man is not a product of his thoughts. Man is a product of the material environment around him. And this affects their ideas. So the basic doctrine of Hegel, this was turned upside down. Okay, it was turned upside down by him. And this is something which you have to remember, because a question आया हुआ है. See question number 23. Marxian communism is primarily the offspring of German Hegelism and French socialism. Like in French socialism, we see about Babeuf. Babeuf was the first person who talks about communism, but he was killed in 1797. Similarly, the idea of class struggle, he was not the first person who talked about class struggle. Saint Simon also talks about class struggle. So French socialism, yes, it did have an influence on Karl Marx, but their own philosopher Hegel also had an impact. And what was the impact? Hegel used to say that a man is nothing but the product of their ideas. So thoughts process are very important, but he says reverse. He says that the material environment influences a certain kind of thoughts. तो उसको reverse कर देते हैं. That's why Hegel का जो पूरा concept था इसको उन्होंने change कर दिया, idealistic से materialism की तरफ change किया. So he adopted the Hegel's interpretation of dialect as the tendency to a finite object of notion to suppress itself to develop contradiction. And using this, he expounded that Marxist dialect, that all important historical development are achieved an all-out clash between old and new principles, and only a revolution can achieve the required goal. So he says that there is going to be a thesis, then there is going to be coming of a antithesis, and when they mix it becomes synthesis. Okay, कि भाई एक primary thesis आएगी, then it will be countered by a antithesis, and finally there is going to be a synthesis. So in the ideas of Karl Marx, he said we have seen capitalism, then we have seen socialism, and finally when these two are going to merge, we will see the rise of communism. This is what he was thinking, but eventually who are reverse? Socialism to some extent survived, communism could not. This is what, so this idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, this was also borrowed by him from Hegel. तो याद रखेंगे Hegel से क्या क्या, एक तो उनका पूरा जो principle था, that was turned upside down by him. He was an idealist and he changed the idea to materialism. Second, he took this theory of thesis, antithesis and synthesis. Alright, and this system of dialectic, इसको dialectic बोलते हैं. When they ask you eventually कि ancient में क्या हुआ था, master and slave relationship was there, medieval में feudal lord and serf, and right now we have bourgeois and proletariat. This dialectic method is very famous from the time of Socrates. He used to talk like that. वो सही आंसर तक नहीं पहुंचाते थे, आपसे सही क्वेश्चन पूछते थे, ठीक है. यूज्ड टू आस्क द राइट काइंड ऑफ क्वेश्चंस एंड यू योरसेल्फ आंसर इट. तो पहले उन्होंने दो बताया, अब बताओ इस टाइम क्या चल रहा है, बुर्जुआ एंड proletariat. You yourself. So this dialectism was also borrowed by him from Hegel. That's why Hegel has a lot of influence on Karl Marx. Both were German. Okay. So that's why this question number 23. Marxian communism is primarily the offspring of German Hegelianism and French socialism. This question may get repeated. It's been more than 23 years. 23 साल हो चुके हैं, तब तक तो नहीं आया है ये, बट आने को आ सकता है. ठीक है. Next, which is very very important, doctrine of class struggle. So for Karl Marx, classes can never have a common interest, है ना. Common interest possible नहीं है. जैसे कि जिन्ना का था, two nation theory, Hindus and Muslim can never have a common interest. For him it was more in the economic field. They can never have a common interest, and therefore there must be an all out struggle. अब decide कैसे करोगे कि कौन सी class है, right? The success of new ruling class in this kind of struggle must be followed by repression and extinction of old ruling classes. Then comes something which is very very fundamental to his understanding, labor value theory. What he says that there are certain factors of production. So that there can be land, capital, and somebody is ready to become an entrepreneur. However, the value or the product is only created because of the labor. So if we see the raw material, this raw material will have no value unless the labor is given by the working class, and as a result of this the profit becomes only because of labor. तो जो सरप्लस वैल्यू बनी है ये किसकी वजह से बनी है? लेबर क्लास की वजह से. लॉजिक समझ में आया? आज की डेट में नहीं चलेगा आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस ऑटोमेशन, अब रोबोट्स भी आ गए. ठीक है, वंस यू गो फॉर ऑटोमेशन तो ये कहानी खत्म हो गई, ये कंसेप्ट नहीं चल पाएगा. बट try to understand from the point of view. The point of view is very clear that since labor is the one which creates the final product which can be sold at a higher price, so जो value बनती है वो कौन provide करता है? Labor. That's why profit में सबसे ज़्यादा हिस्सा किसका होना चाहिए? Labor का, है ना. मान गए ना सब? This is what he was trying to convince. As per labor value theory, Marx argued that labor is just like commodity that can be bought and sold, but it is the only commodity that can produce greater than its own value. कि वो खुद तो बहुत कम पैसा लेते हैं लेकिन produce बहुत ज़्यादा लेते हैं. And this can be termed as surplus product, which constitute the part of the profit of capitalist. That is, the capitalist exploit the labor in order to maximize his own profit. And for Marx, the exploitation of labor is the only source of profit. As machinery can't be exploited, that rate of profit depend upon the number of workers employed. तो ये लेबर सरप्लस थियोरी है इनकी, ये आप ध्यान रखेंगे. ये सारे आइडियाज हैं साइंटिफिक सोशलिज्म की. जब हम बात करते हैं तो ये भी आपको उसके अंदर डालना है. डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ क्लास स्ट्रगल, लेबर वैल्यू थ्योरी, डायलेक्टिक, मटेरियल कंसेप्शन, ऑल ऑफ दिस इज गोइंग टू बी रिक्वायर्ड. ठीक है. देन कम टू द स्प्रेड ऑफ मार्क्सियन सोशलिज्म. बाकी वो सेम ही थियरीज हैं, ज़्यादा कुछ एडिशन होगा नहीं. स्प्रेड में अब हमें बात करनी पड़ती है फर्स्ट इंटरनेशनल. दिस वाज एस्टैब्लिश इन 1864, ओके, and continued till 1875. In 1846, we see the first society of fraternal democrats. Okay, it was established in England. They used to say there should not be wars among the countries, right? So the famous message from this was that I appeal to the exploited class for every country to unite to achieve a common goal. Karl Marx's great contribution was First International to eradicate the entire class system. He became the member of Central Committee, and he said that there is no duty without rights and there are no rights without ड्यूटी, है ना. वो गांधी जी भी यही बोलते थे. देयर इज अ डायरेक्ट रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन ड्यूटीज एंड राइट. ओके, इट इज ड्यूटी ऑफ एवरी पर्सन टू रेज डिमांड फॉर सिविल राइट, नॉट ओनली फॉर हिमसेल्फ बट आल्सो फॉर एवरी ड्यूटियस पर्सन. This international eventually collapsed because of conflict between the various countries of Europe by 1876. Socialism in France developed by that time, which includes revolutions of 1848, which brought to power Louis Blanc. He became the labor minister. Okay, then revolt also came in Paris in 1871. They tried to establish this Paris Commune. However, later on the French army entered Paris and captured it with great barbarity. Then socialism in Germany. So we see the rise of August Bebel. You can remember his name. August Bebel is an important personality. He was a follower of Marx, founded Social Democratic Workers Party. However, Bismarck, he was against capitalism. He was not a follower of the capitalist ideas. He was not a follower of the communist ideas. He was a die-hard capitalist. उसके फेवर में थे. and that's why it did not develop that much. By 1890, Karl Marx left the active, Bismarck left the active politics, and that's why in 1890, Democratic Socialist Party secured 35 seats. Okay, so thereafter they became very popular, and even the current government that we have in Germany, they have this Socialist Democratic Party. It's very famous even till today. Then socialism in England, in between, this also spread. The Fabian socialism became famous in 1900. Okay, Independent Labour Party, Democratic Federation, and this Labour Party was able to win 30 seats in 1906. Russia is an outlier. Okay, Russia initially it was the country which was not industrialized, and Karl Marx used to say that violent revolution or this class struggle is only possible in those areas which have at least some form of industrialization. Russia was not industrialized. However, some of its industrial units, ना पीटर्सबर्ग, वो बहुत बड़े थे, ठीक है. So they had created very humongous establishment, जैसे कि हमारे SEZ टाइप पे होते हैं. That's why the workers, they were concentrated, and that's how we see the beginning of Russian Revolution. And this is the only country which was able to create a revolution based on the basis of the ideas of Karl Marx. ये टॉपिक आपके सिलेबस में लिखा हुआ है, spread of the ideas of Karl Marx. No question has come so far. So you may remember 2-3 points country wise, कहाँ पे कैसे कैसे हुआ. Second international आता है 1889. As I've already told you, he died by 1883. So in this second international, Frederick Engels, he was participating, and he was the one who led this. Okay, even leaders from India like Dada Bhai Naroji, they became a part of this, and they talked about socialism. Similarly, we see rise of various communist party. First one, it is the Russia, then Chinese, by India also 1920, all of you know Communist Party of India, जो बाद में 1925 में merge हो जाती है in कानपुर. Similarly 1921 Chinese Communist Party CCP, it was established by Mao. Okay, and later on we see the rise of similar kinds of party in the Vietnam also. In Vietnam we have the party led by Ho Chi Minh. Okay, so Ho Chi Minh is going to lead the Communist Party in Vietnam. So this is about the spread of communism. यही दायरा है हमारा. अगर हम सोशलिज्म पे क्वेश्चन देखें, जस्ट लाइक एनलाइटनमेंट पे हमने देखे थे कैटेगरी ऑफ क्वेश्चन. फर्स्ट कैटेगरी ऑफ क्वेश्चन इज द नेचर ऑफ प्री मार्क्सिस्ट सोशलिज्म, उस पे क्वेश्चन आता है, उसका नेचर पूछा जाता है. सेकंड, उसकी ज्योग्राफी भी पूछी जाती है, किस किस एरिया में कौन कौन सी सोशलिस्ट आइडियाज थे. देन द क्वेश्चंस आर कमिंग विद रिस्पेक्ट टू हाउ द लेकुनास ऑफ द यूटोपियन सोशलिज्म दे वर मेड साइंटिफिक बाय Karl Marx. That is the question. Then the question is also coming with respect to the differential impact of socialism in France and Britain. That has come twice. Then it's purely about the ideas of Karl Marx. We can expect a question on the spread of Marxian socialism. तो वो आ सकता है फ्यूचर में, अभी तो नहीं आएगा, बट फ्यूचर में आने के चांसेस हैं उसके कि 1-2 साल में आ जाए. अभी तो PYQ में तो कोई भी क्वेश्चन नहीं है उसका. That's all in this first topic of world history, which includes number 1 enlightenment, fix a question, and second is with respect to Marxism, socialism. यहाँ से भी एक क्वेश्चन फिक्स किया, आप देख लो. 23 में क्वेश्चन है, 22 में क्वेश्चन है, 2019 में क्वेश्चन है, 18 में है, 16 में है. तो फ्रीक्वेंसी बहुत हाई है यहाँ से. और जब यहाँ से नहीं भी आता ना, तो उस टाइम क्वेश्चन आता है चाइनीज और आपका रशियन रेवोल्यूशन, विच इज ऑल्सो एन एक्सटेंशन ऑफ मार्क्सिज्म. तो एक तरीके से अगर स्प्रेड की बात करें तो वो उन रेवोल्यूशंस के ऊपर ही क्वेश्चन आ जाते हैं, तो वो हम बाद में बात करेंगे. टू व्हाट एक्सटेंट द रशियन एंड द चाइनीज रेवोल्यूशंस एक्सेप्टेड द आइडियोलॉजी ऑफ कार्ल मार्क्स, बिकॉज एग्जैक्टली उन्होंने भी एक्सेप्ट नहीं किया था. लाइक इन द केस ऑफ रशिया, लेनिन केम अप विद न्यू इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी विच allowed the private enterprise. In case of China, the communism was based upon the support of peasants. यहाँ तो इंडस्ट्रियल वर्कर भी नहीं थे. So that is not something which was accepted by Karl Marx. Karl Marx used to think revolution without industrialized society तो हो ही नहीं सकते, conflict कैसे आएगा. But in case of China, it was done on the basis of even peasant versus the landlords. They were able to do so. Okay, so that was an extension of this Marxist philosophy. So we'll discuss about that later on. Today अभी इतना ही खत्म करते हैं. Those of you who are with us in the modern, Sunday को आपका second test है. That's why we are giving you off tomorrow. अभी आप प्रिपेयर कर लिए 2 दिन के लिए. From Monday onwards, 6 days a week, it's going to begin. ठीक है, so get ready for the marathon. थोड़ा सा हो गया रिलैक्स करके, अब सीधा वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री में आप एंटर कर चुके हो. ठीक है, चक्रव्यूह स्टार्ट हो चुका है. सो विल हैव 6 क्लासेस अ वीक. सो स्टार्ट करेंगे वहाँ से. आपको सेकंड हैंड आउट मिला है, मिल गया ना? तो सेकंड हैंड आउट आपको आई थिंक अमेरिका वाला मिला है, अमेरिका वाला, हाँ ठीक है. तो नाउ वी आर गोइंग टू स्टार्ट विद द मेन फ्रंट टॉपिक्स. अभी तक थोड़ा फिलोसफी के ऊपर हम फोकस कर रहे थे, ये बहुत प्योर फिलोसफी है. अब प्रैक्टिकलिटी की तरफ जाएंगे कि कैसे इस फिलोसफी के बेसिस पे रेवोल्यूशन होंगे. फर्स्ट विल टेक अमेरिका. इन अमेरिका विल टॉक अबाउट अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन, सिविल वॉर, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, तो वो भी पढ़ेंगे थोड़ा सा, ठीक है. तो इट विल टेक रफली 2 days. उसके बाद में ब्रिटिश एज ए कंट्री, क्योंकि हमने आपको इंट्रोडक्शन क्लास में समझाया था कि हम कंट्री स्पेसिफिक जाएंगे. सेकंड विल टेक ब्रिटेन. जब एक बार ब्रिटेन खत्म हो जाएगा देन विल गो टू आर कॉन्टिनेंटल यूरोप पार्ट. वो बिल्कुल कंटिन्यूड है फिर, स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन ऑल द वे अप टू योर कोल्ड वॉर. वो बिल्कुल पूरी एक कहानी चलेगी स्ट्रीम की तरह, इंक्लूडिंग ऑल द मेजर इवेंट्स, वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 एज वेल एज वर्ल्ड वॉर 2, हिटलर, मुसोलिनी. तो अभी हम पहले कंट्री वाइज जाएंगे. फर्स्ट अमेरिका, देन ब्रिटेन, एंड देन द होल ऑफ कॉन्टिनेंटल यूरोप. ठीक है. सो दैट्स इट फॉर टुडे. कोई डाउट होगा आई विल टेक ऑन मंडे. ठीक है.